Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Dental Board of California quarterly board meeting. I am Dr. Alan Felsenfeld and serve as the president of the board. Today is Friday, February 11, 2022. This board meeting is being held via WebEx. In accordance with Government Code Section 11133 and Governor Gavin Newsom's Executive Order N-1-22, this meeting will be held by teleconference with no physical locations. For all those who wish to participate, please log on to the WebEx website provided on the posted agenda for this meeting. Instructions to connect to the meeting are provided on the agenda. The preferred audio connection is via telephone conference and not the microphone and speakers on your computer. The phone number and access code will be provided as part of your connection to the meeting. Since this meeting is being conducted by WebEx, I will ask all board members and speakers to announce themselves by name before speaking for clarity of the official record. All board members are able to unmute themselves to speak during the meeting. Please place yourself back on mute when not speaking to reduce background noise for all participants. When making a motion, please use the raise hand feature to be called upon and then verbally state your name and motion or second so staff can identify the motion and second for the meeting record. During a discussion on an agenda item, please use the raise hand feature if you wish to speak, and I will call on you in sequence. Following such online meeting etiquette will ensure the best audio quality for everyone. During each call for comments from board members and speakers, we will ensure that all comments that can be accommodated are heard before proceeding with the agenda. The board will be taking a 15-minute break in the morning, a 30-minute lunch break to be occurred between 12 and 12:30, and another 15-minute break in the afternoon if necessary. This is an official meeting, business meeting of the Dental Board of California. The board welcomes public comments specific to any item on the agenda, and it is the board's intent to ask for public comments prior to the board taking any action on any agenda item. The DCA moderator will explain the process for providing public comment shortly. When called upon, the moderator will unmute the microphone of the individual and they will have 2 minutes to make public comment. The moderator will audibly announce when 30 seconds remain to conclude the public comment. After the 2 minutes have lapsed, the individual will be placed back on mute. Only one public comment per agenda item is allowed per attendee. Depending on the number of people who would like to testify on a particular agenda item, a total time limit may be imposed. We ask all speakers to please stay on topic and not to repeat testimony already provided. If you agree with testimony already provided, please state your name and that you are in support of any comments previously provided. I would now ask the DCA moderator to please explain how public comments will be taken during this WebEx meeting.
Thank you, Dr. Felsenfeld. This is the moderator. To facilitate public comment, we will be utilizing the WebEx question and answer feature. You will hear me refer to it as the Q&A. When the board reaches a point in the agenda at which public comment is appropriate, the Q&A will be turned on and members of the public can indicate that they would like to make a comment by inserting the phrase, "I would like to make a comment," or simply just the word comment into the question box. This will typically be located in the lower right corner of your screen and can be accessed by clicking on the Q&A icon, which looks like a question mark inside of a square. Please note that this Q&A feature is being used only as a means for members of the public to represent that they would like to make a verbal comment. This is not a means to ask questions of the moderator or members of the board. Such inquiries submitted using this feature will not be answered. When making your comment, please make sure the comment is directed at the host in the dropdown. For those members of the public who have called into the meeting, you may utilize the raised hand feature to indicate you would like to make a comment by dialing *3. We do ask that once you've made your comment, you dial *3 again to lower your hand. I will call on the first individual and give the individual permission to unmute their microphone. We will be taking comments in the order that the requests are received. Each individual will have 2 minutes to make their comments, and at the conclusion of the 2 minutes, I will mute the individual's microphone and move on to the next member of the public, providing a 30-second reminder before your time expires. While you are free to express criticism or negative views for the sake of the members of the public participating on the call, please do not use profane language when making public comments to the board. I will provide a brief reminder of this approach at the start of each public comment item. And finally, when members or senior staff are not speaking, I would like to remind them to mute their microphones. If I detect background noise during the meeting as a result, I will interject with a brief friendly reminder or simply mute your microphone myself. And with that, I will turn it back over to Dr. Felsenfeld.
Thank you, Moderator. I would like to call the meeting to order and ask the Board Secretary to please call the roll.
Good morning. This is Dr. Sonia Molina, Board Secretary. I will now call the roll. Chang? Chang present. Felsenfeld?
Felsenfeld here.
Felsenfeld present. Larin?
Larin here.
Larin present. Mackenzie? Mackenzie present. Medina?
Medina here.
Medina present. Mendoza? Mendoza? Mendoza here. Mendoza present. Molina present. Montel?
Montel here.
Montel present. Mauro? Mauro present. Olagi?
Olagi present.
Olagi present. Pacheco? Pacheco present. You?
You present.
You present. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Dr. Molina. We will now move on to the agenda. Agenda item 23 is moot, so we will now move to agenda item 24, a discussion and possible action regarding approval of the California North State University College of Dental Medicine. We'll ask Sarah Wallace, our interim executive officer, followed by representatives from CNU to present this agenda item. Ms. Wallace.
Good morning, board members. At the May 2021 board meeting, Dr. Kevin Keating, Dean and Professor at California North State University College of Dental Medicine, located in Elk Grove, California, reported that the school will become California's 7th dental school, and he provided an update on the school's accreditation process with the Commission on Dental Accreditation. On August 31st, the school received notification from CODA advising the school of its approved initial accreditation. Subsequently, on September 30th, the school received a letter from the Bureau for Private Post-Secondary Education approving the addition of the Doctor of Dental Medicine program, effective on September 30th, 2021. California Code of Regulations, Title 16, Section 1024, establishes the board's intent to approve only those dental schools that continuously maintain a high-quality standard of instruction and provides the regulatory requirements for the board's approval. Continuation of board approval of a dental school is contingent upon compliance with the regulatory requirements. A new school for the study of dentistry in California is required to apply for provisional approval in its first academic year and is required to apply for final approval when its program is in full operation with classes studying in the curriculum of each of the academic years. The board may, in lieu of conducting its own independent investigation, accept the findings of any commission or accreditation agency approved by the board and adopt those findings as its own. As required by board regulations, California North State University College of Dental Medicine submitted its institutional standards documentation. In addition, CODA has approved the school for initial accreditation, and BPPE has approved the addition of the Doctor of Dental Medicine program. The documentation submitted has demonstrated sufficient compliance with the institutional standards requirements in the board's regulations, and the board may rely on the findings of CODA and BPPE in lieu of conducting its own investigation. In accordance with California Code of Regulations, Title 16, Section 1024, subsection A, board staff recommend that since the school is in its first academic year, the board should grant provisional approval to California North State University College of Dental Medicine. Following the board's approval, the school would be required to apply for final board approval when it is in full operation with classes studying in the curriculum of each academic year. Dr. Keating and his colleagues are available to provide an update to the board and answer any questions. And today, the board staff is requesting the board grant provisional approval to California North State University College of Dental Medicine. And with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Keating.
Thank you very much, Dr. Felsenfeld. I look forward to answering any questions the board may have for us. I'm happy to provide an update on the current development of the College of Dental Medicine at California North State University. And good morning, Dr. Felsenfeld.
Good morning, Dr. Keating. We look forward to your presentation.
Well, at this point, I have no formal presentation, but I'd like to bring you up to date. We are in operation. We started with orientation on January 4th of this year. We went into, within a few days, the uptick in the Omicron virus went into distance education and have been doing that for the last 4 weeks roughly. And on Monday, we anticipate going back into in-person education, as is the university in general. So in terms of development, we've got a class that our first class is 38 out of 40 students that did matriculate into College of Dental Medicine. And we are pleased with the candidates we have. They are meet the national average for candidates accepted into dental schools around the country. We anticipate in July of this year having our second cohort start to graduate in 2026. I should back up one step here. The cohort that is currently has matriculated will graduate in a 3.5-year coded accredited one-time delivery of the 4-year curriculum in 3.5 years, and they will graduate in July of 2025. So that kind of gives you a short synopsis. We continue with the development of our facilities, and you may have heard that the California North State University Medical Center is now moving towards purchasing the Arco Arena area for development of the hospital there. And over the next decade or two, the medical school and other colleges will be moving to that campus. And so that is a kind of update on all the things that I think probably the board would find most interesting. I look forward to answering any questions any of the board members may have.
Thank you, Dr. Keating. Is there any board member discussion? Please use the raised hand feature. I see Dr. Chan first.
Good morning. This is Steve Chan. Good morning, Kevin.
Good morning, Steve. It's been a while. How have you been?
Good. I have a couple of comments and then a question. I see the section in the Dental Practice Act on 1024.1. It's 5 pages, single-spaced of institutional standards requirements. So kudos for putting that together. I also acknowledge that there's item 5C that talks about minimal competence in ethics and professionalism, which segues into the function of the dental board. On the letter from CODA, it's on page 168, and it's the last paragraph. What does programmatic accreditation by the commission mean? What does that mean?
I will, if Dr. Breer is online, I will direct that to her since she is the one who's most able to express an answer to that. So I don't mean to defer, but I rely on the experts within my team here. If you can call up Dr. Breer, she can address that for you, Dr. Chan.
Thank you. Do we do that through you, Alan?
The moderator should, if Dr. Breer is on the line, the moderator should be able to reach Dr. Breer.
Good morning, Dr. Felsenfeld. This is Sarah. We're looking, we do have Dr. Zanuti. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that name, but I don't know that we have Dr. Breer on the line.
This is the moderator. Dr. Breer has not joined yet.
Okay. Well, Dr. Zanuti can also address that since she has experience with CODA and can address that more directly.
Can we get Dr. Zamuti on the line, please, moderator?
And she is available on the line. Moderator, okay. She can control her mute button, correct?
Have control herself. She's a panelist. I did promote her.
The question is, did she hear the question?
This is Steve Chan again. The question is on the last paragraph of the letter from CODA, page 168. It talks about programmatic accreditation by the Commission on Dental Accreditation. What does programmatic accreditation mean?
And good morning. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
We can, ma'am.
Yes, great. Thank you. Sorry. It's like it's been a challenge logging on. I apologize for the delay. So when we're talking about a programmatic accreditation, it talks about the process that is designed to ensure that the academic program has undergone rigorous review process. So that means the standards associated with the specific discipline. So also the programmatic accreditation applies to 1 degree program.
Thank
So
you.
it's how they define, that's how CODA defines the accreditation sequence process.
Thank you.
And Dr. Beer should be joining shortly, I think, because it was mentioned that it would be closer to 9:30. Obviously, you know, we are still in operation, so I apologize on her behalf.
And Dr. Chan, I can give further detail. The programmatic accreditation would be for the Doctor of Dental Medicine program. It does not apply to residencies or other programs that we might add later on. Those end up going through a separate accreditation process at some future date.
Wow, thank you. That's important. Dr. President, is it appropriate to move a motion now so that we can get this on the table?
It will be in a few moments. Why don't we hear 2 more comments from Dr. Morrow and Dr. Pacheco and Ms. Pacheco, and that if you would like to do that, that would be appropriate, sir. Let's see what Dr. Morrow has to say. You're next, sir.
Good morning, Dr. Keating. I will be brave and call you Kevin. This is Steve Morrow. We have known each other and rubbed shoulders for some number of years now. First, I want to just congratulate you and your colleagues at North State University in accomplishing the monumental task of giving birth to a Commission on Dental Accreditation approved dental education program. That is no small feat to accomplish. And I'm sure there were times during that process that you wished that you were back to just practicing endodontics.
Dr. Morrow, you summarized my feelings very nicely. It's been a big challenge, especially when you consider the 2 years that COVID has had on the accreditation process nationally and internationally. It's been a blessing and a curse in that we not in our, having started nearly 2 years ago, but a blessing because it gave us time to further develop our curriculum with this integrated biomedical curriculum. So it is, you take the good and the bad in the same breath, Steve. You know how that works in life.
I've been there, done that. A question regarding the clinical aspect of your program. Where will your students and in what fashion, manner, process will your students achieve their clinical competency?
Well, in part, you're asking where will our clinical operations be? And so those are obviously in development. Our initial facility will be located in Elk Grove. Up until the political turmoil there in Elk Grove that led to moving into Sacramento, we would plan to have our future facility there in Elk Grove. We are currently developing developing property options in and around Arco Arena so that we can have our facility ready there for operations, full operations in the future. So we've got many plans in place. Again, dealing with many different challenges of starting a new school. So I don't know if that addressed your question there, Dr. Morrow.
Yeah, yes, it did. And do you have plans at all for your students to rotate through FQHC type clinics for part of their clinical education?
Yeah, we've got, Dr. Glassman, who you may all know, is on the team, and that is his area of development. But we do plan in the curriculum 8 weeks of up to 8 weeks of rotation in the D4 year in FQHCs, and we have MOUs with many of those. And Dr. Glassman is furthering developing the contracts for those FQHC community experiential learning opportunities.
Another question regarding your university and your program as a whole. I understand that California North State University has a pre-dental education program in addition to the DMD program. Could you tell me how those operate and work together?
Yeah, well, it's a pathway program, and I'm sure you're familiar with those. And so it is still in stages of development. Well, I won't say it's stages of development. We've got some of our initial candidates are out of the post-bac program from CHS. They've got degrees from elsewhere, but we're in the post-bac program there at CHS. But it is providing, the undergraduate campus is a health science campus offering degrees in health science. It also has a master's program in pharmaceutical sciences and in hospital administration. And my understanding is they should soon have PhD programs in those two areas. They also have it is a health science academic health center. And so that is the vision. And I am sure that as the undergraduate campus grows, it'll start adding other colleges to its curriculum. But for now, it's the university is a health science focused university. A little background, it started by 20 pharmacists and physicians who were interested in adding another academic health center to the greater Sacramento area.
Thanks very much. Another question regarding that program. If a student goes through your pre-dental program, what kind of advantages does that give them from a standpoint of being accepted into your DMD program?
Well, the advantage is that they're certain to receive an interview, but it's no guarantee of admissions into the program. They still have to be academically competitive. It just provides them an opportunity to interact with the dental school faculty so that we understand, and you understand as an educator yourself, knowing your students and their capability is easier than based on background than just relying on an interview and academic credentials alone. And so it gives the opportunity for a direct interaction through either research and or engagement with the on campus with the faculty of the College of Dental Medicine. But it doesn't guarantee them admission. That would be a pipeline, as you understand probably, and we don't have a pipeline. That would be inappropriate simply because we want to have the opportunity to assess our candidates, not only on their academic skills, but on their personalities and their interests in community outreach. And that fits within the mission of the College of Dental Medicine. And it may not be apparent from the information that you have, but one of those, the task force, when we looked into establishing a College of Dental Medicine, roughly 5 years ago, one of the things is we recognize the unmet need in the greater Sacramento area and the Central Valley for those communities of need. And we recognize that, just make some points, the demographics here in Sacramento, just the Sacramento District Dental Society serves a population that's greater than 28 other states. And those states have 1 or 2 dental schools. And when you look at Sacramento, the metropolitan area, it's the 20th largest metropolitan area in the United States. In the top 30, it is the only one without a dental school within 80 to 100 miles. So when you factor in the population and the community that we serve, there is certainly within Sacramento area the need for an academic oral health center as part of this larger campus. So hopefully that little demographic background may provide some insight or answer to your question, Dr. Morrow. Did I address your question adequately there? Yeah.
Sure, that helps. Obviously, all of us that are in dental school administration and faculty are aware that what I generally refer to as feeder schools. In other words, we have colleges, universities that feed students into us as far as our educational program. And I think to have your own feeder school, so to speak, has some advantages. But it also could have some potential disadvantages from a standpoint of favoritism.
Yeah, that's we recognize that, and so you covered that topic well. The interesting thing is the BPPE also has some similar concerns, and so we have another regulatory agency that does look carefully at that, and we do try to manage that as best we can as a new institution, and it's been a learning curve for the other colleges, and we benefit from those lessons learned.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate your time, and I definitely appreciate your energy and your dedication to establishing this 7th dental school in our great state of California. And if there's anything that I can do to help you or lend any assistance, don't hesitate to contact me.
Thank you, Dr. Morrow. Very much appreciated.
Ms. Pacheco.
Hello, Dr. Keating. My comment is also one of congratulations. I just had a question. Is the school going to have any kind of interdisciplinary collaboration with any of the dental hygiene programs?
Well, that's part of the vision. So we've already reached out and had communication with both Sacramento City College dental hygiene program and Carrington College hygiene program. So the answer is yes, but those are still all under development. So it's a vision more so than a reality at this point.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Keating, Dr. Zanuti had put her hand up once or twice. Does she have something she'd like to contribute before we move on?
Yes, I'm so sorry. It's like, I just wanted to add with regards to our collaboration with our undergraduate college that I would like to elaborate a little bit more on the relationship, that we don't see the relationship as being, allow me to use the word that Dr. Morrow used before, as a feeder school. We act as mentors for the pre-dent group because the first thing is we want to make sure they know what they're getting into. And it's always a two-way street. We get to know them better and they get to know us better. So there's always something to be said about knowing someone very, very well. They do still have to go through the rigorous process of our admissions, which incorporates not just their academic performance and their metrics, but also we're implemented a non-cognitive skills test to see whether we can attract applicants that hold the same non-cognitive skills that are expected from a professional dentist. So I just wanted to clarify that it's not a direct, oh, you're a CHS, so you automatically are accepted to CDM. They still need to go through the rigorous process.
Thank you. Dr. Morrow, I assume you need to put your hand down because it's still up. And I see.
Well, I want to thank you for that additional explanation regarding the relationship between your predoctoral and your doctoral education program in your dental program. So I appreciate that understanding. Thanks.
Thank you. And I saw Dr. Chan's hand for a moment. Are you still with us, Dr. Chan? There we go. You're up, sir. Go ahead.
Mr. President, Dr. President, is it appropriate now to move the motion?
At this point, it would be, staff is recommending that the board grant provisional approval of the California North State University College of Dental Medicine. Would you like to make that motion?
I'd like to make the motion that the Dental Board of California grant provisional approval of the California North State University College of Dental Medicine.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Pacheco, I'm seconding the motion.
Excuse me, I should have called in your Pacheco. I saw that. All right, sorry about that. Is there any further discussion by the board members on the motion? Seeing none, we will turn to public comment. DCA moderator, please facilitate comment by the public.
This is the moderator. We've opened the Q&A panel. If you'd like to comment on this motion, please click on that Q&A icon on your screen. Type comment into the text box and send that to your host. For those who are call-in users, you can raise your hand by dialing *3. And seeing no requests for comment, I will close the panel.
Thank you very much. Board Secretary, would you be kind enough to take the vote, please?
And provisional approval to the California North State University College of Dental Medicine. And now we'll call the roll. Chan?
Chan, aye.
Chan, aye. Felsenfeld?
Felsenfeld, yes.
Felsenfeld, aye. Larin?
Larin, aye, yes.
Larin, aye. McKenzie? McKenzie, aye. Medina? Medina, aye. Mendoza? Mendoza? Molina, I. Montel. Montel, I. Morrow.
Morrow, I.
Morrow, I. Olagi. Olagi, I. Pacheco.
Pacheco, aye.
Pacheco, I. You. You, I. Motion passes.
Thank you, Board Secretary. Dr. Keating, you and your faculty are to be congratulated for a very difficult task, and we wish you well in the future.
Thank you, Dr. Felsenfeld, and thank you, board members, for your support of the California North State University College of Dental Medicine. I look forward to the next time that we get to speak with the board.
All right, sir. Thank you, and get back to work. You have students waiting for you.
Yes, we do. Thank you.
We now move on to agenda item 25A, a presentation regarding the board's diversion program. I'm going to ask Ms. Wallace to introduce our guests as well as discuss the program very briefly. Ms. Wallace.
Good morning, board members. I wanted to provide a brief introduction. The board has a diversion program that's established in statute that is intended to rehabilitate licensees whose competency may be impaired due to abuse of dangerous drugs or alcohol, so that those licensees so afflicted can be treated and returned to the practice of dentistry in a manner that will not endanger the public health and safety of Californians. Today, we have asked Dr. Curtis Dixie, who is the co-chair of the board's Diversion Evaluation Committee, and Ginny Matthews, who is a Maximus representative, to provide information to the board. Both Dr. Dixie and Maximus have presented at the board at prior meetings. I believe it's been almost 3 years since we've had a presentation. And with the coming on of new board members, and I believe Dr. Chan has also requested for a presentation in the past, we thought that this would be a good opportunity. So today we have Dr. Dixie here, who will provide background to the board on what the program has to offer, and then also Virginia Matthews and Pam Moore from Maximus, who is our contractor that we work with on the diversion program. And with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Dixie, Virginia, and Pam.
Dixie, thank you for inviting me. I think we were going to have Virginia Matthews start out with some background and some detail.
Okay, good morning, and thank you for having us. This is Ginny Matthews. I'm the project director for the Maximus program. I need to know, moderator, do I have control of the slides, or will I need to ask to advance them?
We can control the slides for you if you'd like. If you want to control them yourself, we can transfer that control to you.
Okay, would you transfer that to me, please?
We can do that. And have you advanced slides in WebEx before?
I have not.
Okay, so you have control now. On the left of your screen, you should see a vertical bar, and at the top there's 4 squares.
Yes.
Click those 4 squares. It opens a thumbnail view of the presentation, and you can click on those to move through it.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I have just a few minutes, and I'll give you just a background of the program very quickly. I've allowed some time for questions, and then Dr. Dixie has a very compelling story to tell. So we want to move through the nuts and bolts here so that you can really hear the rest of our story. It's not advancing. Why is it not advancing? I can see the thumbnails, but it's not advancing for me.
So if you click on the next slide you'd like to display,
yes,
from those thumbnails.
I am. Okay. Let me give it back to you because it's not advancing for me.
All right, I will take it back and we will take care of that for you.
Go ahead and move on to the next one then. So I am Virginia Matthews. I'm the project director. I'm a nurse. And with me today is Pam Moore. She's also a nurse, and she's our clinical case manager. And she's assigned to work with the dental board participants. Go on to the next one. We work with 8 professional licensing boards. So Maximus is a contractor for the Department of Consumer Affairs. Our primary contract is with the DCA. And of those 8 licensing boards, health professional licensing boards, the dental board is one of them, also the dental hygiene board, which
Moderator, I think we've lost her.
you've lost me.
I can hear you. Dr. Felsenfeld, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Yes, I'm sorry.
No worries.
Did you lose me? I thought we lost her for a second. I'm sorry.
No, I think we lost you actually.
Yeah, I'm back.
Okay. And we have the dental board and the dental hygiene board. The dental hygiene, formerly the dental hygiene committee as a subcommittee of the dental board, now their own board. And then you can see the other boards that we work with. Go ahead. And Board of Nursing is the largest, about 75% of the total. And we have about 380 total participants enrolled. Our enrollment overall has been dropping over the years, and I'll let you know that. At one point, we were close to 900 back in maybe 2010. So our numbers have dropped over the years pretty significantly. Go ahead and advance. If you don't take anything else away from us today, the most important thing that I want you to take away is that we recognize substance use disorder as a disease process. We recognize there's a strong genetic influence and it's a chronic relapsing brain disease. It's not bad behavior. Bad behavior is a symptom of the disease. It does result in problems with family, with coworkers, with behaviors in their lives, psychosocial situations. But the bottom line is this is a chronic relapsing brain disease. Comparable relapse rates to diabetes, cardiac disease, and asthma. And it creates long-term and sometimes permanent changes in brain chemistry. There's a strong effect on the pleasure center, sometimes so strong that the individual affected is not able to overcome the powerful effects on the brain's chemistry. And that's what they're fighting. Go ahead and advance. The risk for healthcare professionals is even stronger than it is for the general public. I'm sorry, do we have a question? No? Okay. The risk for healthcare professionals is even stronger than it is for the general public. And it's because it's accessible to healthcare professionals in a way that the substances are not necessarily accessible to the public. And also because, especially right now, healthcare professionals are faced with some incredibly stressful situations. Relapses in the general public range from 60 to 70% in the first 4 years of recovery, but we know in our program that the relapse rate is 12 to 13%. Go ahead and advance. The reason that healthcare professionals are susceptible to SUD or substance use disorder is the attitude and the accessibility. Go ahead and advance. Healthcare professionals tend to be outward focused and not focused on themselves. They're focused on their patients. Very reluctant to identify substance use disorder in themselves because of the shame and denial, and they feel that it doesn't relate to them, that they're immune to it. Go ahead. Next slide. The attitude about medications can be very cavalier because they're handling these powerful substances daily, and they see the positive effects of them every day, and all of you working in the field see that. You tend to become insensitive to the power of the medications and forget the risks. It's very easy to forget that these are some very powerful substances. Go ahead and advance. And they're very poorly controlled in many settings. So these substances are very accessible, especially in offices. In hospital settings, which our dentists aren't typically exposed to, but I'll comment that in hospital settings, the narcotic waste policies are not consistently followed. I imagine in dental surgery offices that may be the case as well, so that if they're not using a full dose, the waste is not very well controlled. And then writing prescriptions for themselves and for others is getting harder but there are still ways to circumvent the processes. Go ahead and advance. So the goal of the program, and we use diversion and recovery interchangeably, and the original term diversion was meant to be diversion from discipline. It was not meant to be diversion of medications. It had that negative connotation. It really was meant to have a positive connotation, diversion from discipline. But so we're using more often now the recovery program. But it's to protect the public health and welfare from healthcare professionals who may be impaired as a result of substance use disorders, and to immediately intervene and provide rehabilitation, help, and hope in order to return the individual to safe practice. So really the key points are to protect the public and to return our dentists back to, and our dental assistants back to safe practice in a way that's monitored and controlled. Go ahead. So who are the key players in the program? There's the participant, and around the participant, we have the board, Maximus, the support groups, the diversion evaluation committee, the random drug testing process, and the worksite monitor process. And I'll go into a little bit more about that next slide. To bring them into the program, they can either be referred through probation. They agree to participate in the program as a term of their stipulated settlement, or as a self-referral. We don't get too many self-referrals. Usually, if they're coming in as a self-referral, they're trying to avoid what they know is coming down the road. So they're trying to get ahead of it, and eventually they become more of a disciplinary process. But in all cases, the board is aware that they're in the program, and the case is managed in the same way. There are no special privileges, and there's no special treatment if someone's a self-referral compared to if they're a probation or a board referral. Go ahead and advance. Initially, they come into the program. Their intake assessment is conducted by phone with the case manager. All of our case managers currently in the program are registered nurses. Pam is attending the meeting today, although I'm not sure if she has the ability to speak, but she is present with us today, so she'll be able to answer any questions you might have. But she conducts an intake assessment, and then that takes about an hour and a half to 2 hours. That's that initial determination of what brings the individual into the program, what's the extent of their substance use, whether or not they've been using and practicing while they're impaired, how severe is the situation, and that do they need immediate treatment, or do they need to, or can it be deferred while we complete the rest of the assessment process? So then we send them to a clinical assessment. Pre-pandemic, those were in person. Right now, we're doing them by Zoom. There's no charge to the applicant for that unless they're a no-show. Then we do charge them if they fail to show up. We also have available in cases that we need a clearer picture. We may ask them to go for a more intensive assessment, which would be a 3-day intensive assessment at a program that specializes in healthcare professionals. There are a few that we're familiar with that we know do a good job and provide a more thorough psychosocial assessment that give us a better picture of what's really going on with the individuals. Those are conducted at the expense of the participant, and they can range in cost anywhere from $5,000 to $12,000 depending on where they go. We'll help them find that. And I think in many cases, those are covered by insurance. It just depends on the individual case, what's available to them, what they, whether or not they have insurance. There are a lot of variables in that. Beyond that, they go into treatment as recommended by the assessment and by that initial intake. And after they complete that treatment, whether it's an initial inpatient treatment or intensive outpatient treatment. When they complete that, they communicate with the case manager weekly by phone and check in to make sure that their initial steps in the process they're managing that whole initial process, which can be quite daunting, and we kind of coach them through that. Go ahead and advance. We use diversion evaluation committees. This is a unique model in California. 5 of our boards use that. This is actually a picture of one of the nursing meetings and what they really do look like. Pre-pandemic, we were meeting in hotel conference rooms or the dental board's conference room up in California, up in Sacramento. For 2 of the meetings, and then in Southern California, we were meeting in a hotel meeting room for the other 2 meetings. But the committee is made up of representatives that are appointed by the board, by you, the board, and they serve their term. And when you speak with Dr. Vixie, he's one of our longstanding committee members. They formally review and accept the applicants into the program. They look at the ongoing recovery plan and make any changes that the participant might want to their plan. And they're responsible for approving any of the privileges or changes. So when a participant is ready to go back to work, when a participant is ready to reduce their meeting frequency, that it's the committee that makes that decision. And it's a powerful, very, very effective process. And the reason that it is that the committee tends to be in recovery themselves or working in the field, and it's hard to fool them. And so as the participants come into the program and think that they're going to present a smooth and sophisticated and put together picture, the committee knows what they're looking for, and they've seen it all, and they know that they're not going to let the participant to kid them on what they want us to believe, and they get down to the nitty-gritty. So it's a very, very powerful and effective process. Go on. So once the participant starts, after they do that initial intake, we have them start 12-step meetings. We have them start daily. Initially, 90 meetings in 90 days is the typical 12-step way to go. Sometimes people are opposed to that. They don't want the spiritual nature of 12-step meetings, and so we have allowed them to choose other forms of community support groups, peer support groups, but they have to be abstinence-based. So whatever they're choosing in the community, whatever they find, it needs to be an abstinence-based meeting. They also attend a peer support group, which is run by a licensed clinician, that we have a list of approved groups for them to attend once or twice a week, and that depends on what the committee approves. They have to submit a written monthly self-report to us, and once they've been seen by the committee, they go from weekly to monthly check-in calls with their case manager. So they're doing a telephone check-in call on top of the monthly written check-in. Go ahead and advance. The drug testing is a huge component of what we do. Some of it is managed by the not managed, but directed by the uniform standards, and you may have heard of those. Somewhere along the line, that's sometimes referred to as the 1441 standards. Back in 2010, there was legislation that passed that created a set of 14 requirements for programs and probation to follow with substance abusing licensees. And a big component of that was drug testing. And so one of the pieces of that is the frequency of drug testing. And when participants start in the program, they're required to do 52 times a year for the first year. So they check in daily with our lab provider, which is a third-party administrator, and they can use the phone, web, or mobile app. And they're notified when they do their check-in whether they've been selected. They must test on the same day. We use a pretty extensive test panel with very low cutoff values. It's highly sensitive. Most often we use urine. We have options to use saliva, hair, and blood. We do once a year a hair test, which is a little more sensitive and has approximately a 3-month window of detection.
Elena, I want to do the rants. I can help you with the laundry really quickly.
Maybe he'll do my laundry. Okay. They may use, we may use hair has a 3-month window of detection, and blood has a roughly a 3-week window of detection, primarily alcohol. We also use ETG and ETS test for alcohol. It's ethyl glucuronide, ethyl sulfide, and that's a test for alcohol biomarker in urine that has a 3-day window of detection. So it's gotten pretty sophisticated in what we can detect in our testing. That's a urine test for alcohol. The ETG ETS test is in every urine test we do. So when we're doing those 52 times a year, those weekly tests, that ETG ETS test is in all of them. And again, the blood and the hair are done randomly once during the year or added as needed. Not routinely using breath or sweat or SoberLink, although we have the options for all of those. And since the pandemic, we have done some oral fluid testing for people that have been on quarantine and haven't been able to get out to do testing at the lab, and we do video monitored saliva testing. Go ahead and advance. To return to work, the participant must apply to the committee and request to return to work, and the committee evaluates their readiness. So we look at whether they're compliant, whether their drug test results have been negative. Those uniform standards I mentioned require at least 30 days of negative results to return to work. We look at their support group facilitator and whether they're recommending, whether they're ready, and they see them once or twice a week, so they have a good handle on how they're doing with their recovery. We ask them to write an essay talking about relapse prevention, what triggers they think they're going to face in the workplace. Many of the issues that really triggered the whole substance use disorder escalation were issues that were occurring in the workplace. So we ask people to really examine what was happening in the workplace and what are they going to face when they go back to work. Will there be narcotics available to them, poorly controlled? Are there stresses that they're going to face? Are there challenges with their work skills that they're concerned about that they need to work on, to remediate? Are there employee issues that they need to look at? What kinds of triggers are they facing that may lead them back to rely on their substances to manage their stresses? And we want to help them avoid that and use the tools that they've learned in the program rather than going back to substances to support to deal with their stresses. Go ahead and advance. And when they identify a job, and in some cases they're offered a job, that would be typically an RDA, but the dentists returning to their own private practice, they still have to identify a worksite monitor. If they're in a group practice, that's a little easier. If they're in an individual practice, they're going to have to identify a dentist in the community that's willing to come in and check on them unannounced to look at their clinical practice. To make sure that they're practicing safely, that they're following appropriate infection control guidelines, that they're following appropriate safety, and that they're not in any way practicing impaired. They must submit a release of information to us, telling us that with the worksite monitor, who they are, how to contact them, that the worksite monitor knows how to contact us. We provide training. We have a video the worksite monitor watches to know about what signs to look at in the workplace that might identify someone who is working while impaired. Go ahead and advance. And the worksite monitor can't be someone who's employed. Now, in cases where someone is in private practice, it may be someone in their office, like the office manager, or someone. But it can't be if the office manager happens to be their spouse. That we don't allow that. But if it's someone that is employed by them, then they absolutely need to have someone else serving as a worksite monitor who is not related or employed to them or otherwise indebted to them. We want to look at a job description and make sure that there's within their job privileges, and we have an affidavit that they have to submit to us to show that they meet the criteria. Go ahead and advance. The program costs, the intake assessment, there's no charge. The clinical assessment is no charge. The program administrative fee for dentists and dental hygiene and RDAs is $100 a month. Go ahead and advance. Support group varies depending on what the support group facilitator charges. They are not employed by Maximus, they're independent. So they have independent charges and they work that out with the participants. It can range from $200 to $400 a month. Their cost of treatment is going to vary depending on whether or not they have insurance, what level of health of treatment they're going into, whether it's inpatient, outpatient, intensive outpatient, or just simply medications. So that's going to vary, and whether their insurance covers it. So we can't predict that, but that's another cost that the participant has to carry. Drug testing is $57.50 per test plus the cost of collection. The cost of collection should be $30 to $50 additional per test. So it should be $87.50 to $107.50 per test over the course of a year, unless they're going in after hours. After hours testing have some additional fees, and we're working with our third-party administrator on that because we have recently had some issues with after-hours fees escalating. So we're working on getting those down again to more reasonable costs. Go ahead and advance. We have a transition period. So by contract, our dental board participants are in the program for 5 years. So after 4 years of good compliance, that last year is transition. They're on a reduced monitoring for a period of a year before they're given that successful completion. The objective of that transition is to allow them to take full responsibility for their own recovery process. So we back off on the monitoring. They have to request transition. They write an essay. We really ask them to look in depth at their life. It's really an autobiography talking about their journey in recovery with a relapse prevention plan and letters of reference from the people that are close to them and their support group facilitator. Go ahead and advance. And they must demonstrate a manner of living that supports ongoing recovery, proof of negative drug tests, no evidence of relapse in the last 2 years, and at least 5 years of satisfactory participation in order to successfully complete. We have about a 65% successful completion rate. Those that have not completed successfully, that remaining unsuccessful completion would include people that moved out of state, people that withdrew from the program, people that failed the program, any other reason. So that 65% is purely successful completion. And I think I hit the end. Go ahead and advance. I think that was the last slide. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Vixie.
Thank you. My name is Curtis Vixie, and I'm a grateful recovering addict and alcoholic. What we've planned today is for me to tell my recovery story, and I'm using the format that we do in AA. When we have a sobriety birthday meeting, we often tell our story in the meeting, primarily for the purpose of giving hope to the new people in that meeting. And we usually start the story, or we do start the story at the place when we first started using. And that's based on, or when we first started abusing a mood-altering substance, because that's when we know from PET scans of our brains now, that's when our emotional maturity can stop. So in my case, I'm not going to start the story when I first started using, because that came years later. I was raised in a very conservative Seventh-day Adventist home. So, I wasn't around alcohol. I was raised in a very loving home. My father was a college professor, my mother, director of a school of nursing. So, I was given every opportunity that a normal, successful person has. But when I was 9 years old, kind of where my story starts, I was given a ride home from school, and it was our neighbor lady, and she picked up my brother and I and said, on the way home, we have to stop by my husband's office. Her husband was an oncologist. And she said, come in with me. Well, it was an ambush. We went in an exam room, and there were my parents and her husband, the oncologist. And I was told my father had cancer and he was going to die. And I remember clear as day thinking, I'm not going to let this bother me. I'm not going to feel. And I was pretty successful at that, even at the age of 9. A year later, my mother was diagnosed with the same sort of cancer. They each lived 8 years. Well, during those 8 years, life became pretty hard. And I had to be much more grown up than I should have had to be, but I rose to the occasion. And I was a very good little boy, so to speak. So, all through high school, they the last one passed away my junior year of high school. And in high school, I did not drink. I did not party. I had to be good, to be responsible. The last one passed away my junior year of high school. In hindsight, I was terrified. At the time, I could not have identified that because I had become very proficient at turning off feelings. But my fear led me to not finish high school, instead apply to college. Applied to college, same thing, not partying. In college, I didn't know what to take, but I knew the school felt safe. So I wanted to, stay in school for as long as I could. So I decided to take dentistry. All through the 4 years of college, still didn't party. Never drank once. The day I got accepted to dental school, I went to the dormitory at the college, found some friends that I knew partied, and said, I want to get drunk. And now I should back up. During college, this was, of course, in the 80s, I started growing marijuana and selling it. Not very successfully, but never once used it. I think also looking back, it was an act of defiance. It was an act of anger, that I did not know how to express any other way. Well, nonetheless, day I got my acceptance letter, went to the dorm, got drunk. It was nice. I liked it. It did not end up being my drug of choice, but each weekend thereafter, I would get drunk. And when I drank, I didn't just drink to be social. I drank to get drunk. Well, I got accepted to Loma Linda University. I was from the Seventh-day Adventist pipeline, shall we say. And, when I got accepted, I think if I could have been in touch with my feelings, I was absolutely terrified. And I believed they must have made a mistake to accept me. There was no way I was going to be able to do what was asked of me, but I went forward. That first quarter, as terrified as I was, I did not drink on the weekends. I was also afraid of getting caught because at Loma Linda, you know, we were not supposed to drink or smoke or use drugs. Well, by Christmas of that, you know, the end of the first quarter, I realized I was going to pass. Not because I was smart enough, but in my thinking, there were enough of my classmates more stupid than I, as terrible as that sounds. Well, so I relaxed a little bit and found my classmates that were partiers and started on weekends partying rampantly. Still did well in school, started partying, started growing pot again, but this time smoking it. Well, excuse me. My junior year of dental school was into racing mountain bikes, and I crashed and broke my clavicle. Went to the emergency room there at the medical center, and I was hurting very bad. The ER resident came in and said, you know, you're hurting. I'll give you, I think she said, I know you're a dental student. You guys party a lot. And I said, no, not me. You know, she said, oh, yeah, I know. I'll give you really good pain medicine. Well, that was my first time taking opioids. I went back, you know, got the prescription filled, went back to my apartment, opened the bottle, and took 9 Percocet. I mean, you know, I had at that point been partying very, very hard. So my mindset was drugs. If a little bit's good, a lot's better. Well, for the first time in my life, I felt like I perceived the rest of the world must feel. I didn't know I was uncomfortable, angry, and scared until I no longer was uncomfortable, angry, and scared. And I wanted to feel like that the rest of my life. It was incredible. It was a spiritual experience for me. Well, 17 hours later, I still hadn't peed. And I got out my pharmacology textbooks, and it said that 2% of people who take opioids get urinary retention. Well, you know, today I know 100% of people with no tolerance who take 9 Percocet, you know, if they didn't die, they would have urinary retention. Well, I had to go back to the emergency room. Sorry. And be catheterized. Went in, and of course I did not tell them I took 9. I said, you know, I'm one of that 2%. Well, they gave me an internal medicine resident this time, and he was asking me, it seemed like 600 questions. Well, about the time I must have called one of my roommates or my girlfriend. I was dating one of my classmates, because they came up to the ER about the time he was asking me some very personal questions. You know, have you been with a prostitute in the last 12 hours? Have you engaged in anal sex? You know, just humiliating questions. But, you know, I understand now they were concerned about who knows what, infections, prostate infections, diseases. When my girlfriend and my classmates heard those questions, of course, as young people would, they thought it was funny. I was humiliated. They finally catheterized me. I left, went back to my apartment, and, you know, if you kind of evaluate the situation, my life up to that point had shown great motivation, great willpower, great dedication to goals. I had been going to church. It didn't work for me. I didn't really believe in it, but somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew we were spiritual beings and we needed to try and touch that somehow. My best attempt was church. So I had morality to the best of my ability. I had willpower. I obviously had intellect enough to be in dental school and be doing well. But despite that, when I found a substance that made me at peace with the world and dealt with those emotions that I had not been dealing with, that I had been shoving in an emotional garbage can, and they had been putrefying and rotting out, when I found the substance that took that pain away, I wanted it. So went back to the apartment, opened the bottle, and took 12. I mean, sheer insanity from the moment I found my drug of choice. I didn't want to go back to the ER, obviously, so I called one of my roommates who had been a nurse before he came to dental school. And I said, on your way home from clinic, you need to go by a pharmacy and get a cath kit, because in about 10 hours, you're going to need to catheterize me. And he did. Well, I didn't have access to opioids, but that was the day I crossed the line into full-blown addiction, even though I had been in, obviously, abuse, severe abuse up to that point with the alcohol and the other substances that were street drugs. I started partying a tremendous amount, still doing well in school. Well, my senior year, I and my roommate went out to a bar and were watching, I think, the World Series. We both got very drunk. He was driving, coming back. He got stopped for speeding. But the officer took me out of the passenger side of the car and charged me with a DUI because I was so verbally obnoxious. You know, horrific I must have been. In that story, that got dropped. But the next day, the dental school heard about it. And I was called up to the dean's office, and most of the associate deans were there also. You know, at that time, they didn't really know what to do. The dean told me that he had gone to grade school with my father in the early 30s, and he knew how much my father loved Jesus. So he couldn't believe that I hadn't been taught proper values and morals, and he was ashamed of me. And of course, I played into that and lied and said it was the first time I'd ever drank. They were going to kick me out, expel me, but they decided to just, expel me for a month and let me back in and finish. That was the best they knew. They didn't have a program to deal with it. So I promised to be good. Came back, graduated, was engaged to my girlfriend, got married. We decided to come to, a tiny town in Northern California, Susanville, town of 7,000 people, and take over her father's practice. They, of course, were also very conservative Seventh-day Adventists. And why I bring that up is I knew I couldn't comfortably drink in front of them. What I didn't realize was how dependent on drinking I had become, because, and my wife knew I partied, but had no idea the level. I had no idea, though, the dependency I had gotten on literally getting drunk every night. Well, the first day in practice, I saw samples of Vicodin in the supply cupboard at the office. Well, that first day I took 3. And it was wonderful. I didn't have urinary retention, and I felt perfect. I didn't feel the need to drink. Well, within 6 months, it had escalated. My tolerance had gone up to where I could get by with 30 Vicodin a day, but 60 was better. It became a lot of work to get that many. But also, my wife got to know me high and impaired. Our relationship started that way. And, I wasn't a mean drunk or impaired person. We obviously did not form an emotionally intimate relationship. I had no skills in that area, and the drugs took away whatever little skills I had, but it was what it was. the practice flourished. We went from, when we bought it, we built a new building. We hired 16 employees. We had the world by the tail. I started having a hard time getting enough drugs. I did things like order bottles of 1,000 from, back then it was Darby, and then there wasn't the controls there are today. That lasted me about 3 weeks. When I ran out, I of course would drink. And that's when my wife became very upset with me, rightfully so. I was drunk. So then I'd go get more drugs. I'd go to the local pharmacies and get bottles of 100 for office use, but they'd be gone very quickly. At one point I got the habit of giving patients prescriptions and telling them that, if I take out a tooth, I'd want to check the extraction site the next day and have them bring their prescriptions in for me to check, because I tell them the pharmacies screw up all the time. I need to check them. But one day a lady took out a perio-involved tooth, gave her prescription for 30 Vicodin and antibiotics, had her come back the next day. She came in for me to check the extraction site, and she said, well, I didn't bring the prescriptions because I never had to take any. Well, I was counting on telling her they were the wrong prescriptions, throwing them away in front of her, giving her a new prescription, digging them out of the trash. When she didn't bring them and I needed them that day, I'd been planning, that was going to be my day's supply. I had her wait a few minutes. I said, I have to finish up in the next operatory. Knew she was a widow, got in my pickup, went to her house, found a window, crawled in, and stole them. I became a thief, a burglar, a cheat. My many episodes of not having enough drugs and drinking caused horrific issues. I went fishing, got drunk, coming home. Fishing boat came off the top of the truck and hit an oncoming car on a 2-lane road, totaled the car. The people were physically okay. I'm sure to this day they are terrified. The CHP that came was a patient. I was obviously very drunk. He looked at me and said, Dr. Vixie, I'm putting in my report that I gave you a sobriety test and I'm putting that you passed it. Now go home. For years, I thought of that as an example of society's denial. And while that is very likely true, I think there's a deeper level that I never need to forget. There's a possibility that that was another example of how abusive I was to the people around me. Maybe that man could not see himself as the patient of a drunk. So it started to fall apart pretty quickly. One day when the UPS truck didn't bring my bottle of 1,000, I, without saying anything to my wife or the staff, I walked out of the back of the office, got in my truck, and drove 100 miles over the mountain to another town. I'd hit up our local pharmacies too many times and went to 10 pharmacies doing prescriptions for Vicodin and antibiotics under false names. Went back to collect, run my trap line, I called it. And in one pharmacy, there was 2 sheriff's deputies standing at the pharmacy counter in the back of the big pharmacy. I saw them, I turned around, the pharmacist pointed at me as I was going back out the front door, and they started running, so I started running, ran through the parking lot, ducking, dodging, laid underneath the truck for about a half hour until I saw the sheriff car drive away. And as strange as it is, that was one of the first moments when I said out loud to myself, I don't think this is normal. But I couldn't stop. The next day back at the office, or I got home that night, and my wife said, where the heck, and she probably didn't use the word heck, were you today? She said, but I figured it out. We got a call from the sheriff's department over the mountain. And they said, somebody stole one of our prescription pads. And she said, that was you, wasn't it? You know, up to this point, she had never seen me take drugs. You know, I had hidden it from her. She'd got to know me high and happy. We, of course, the sheriff's department came to the office a couple days later. I hid in the back. You know, the staff didn't know anything about it, pretended whatever. We drove back to that town. I found an attorney. He asked for a $5,000 retainer. We did not have $5,000 at that point. We were in debt $1.8 million for our office and, you know, big clinic we built. We came up with it. We paid him. 2 days later, he called me and said, you'll never hear anything more about this. And that was the end of it. Well, there's many stories of insanity around the drinking, around relationship stuff. And I think I've told enough to paint a picture that I was out of control. My dentistry, and I think I can say this without being in denial or minimizing, because part of my later treatment was to go back through my cases and look for situations where I, in one way or another, I needed to make amends to people, and that really wasn't the case. So I bring up the point that 99% of dentistry is old behavior once you learn it. So the impairment hadn't gotten to my dentistry. It was the only place left that it hadn't. But based on that, this body, the board members, the folks I'm talking to right at this moment, were my number one fear. I was absolutely terrified of the board finding out, because it was the only place that I had a modicum of value left, or perceived value. You know, I could do the dentistry. Now, what I later learned when I had an assessment is, you know, the old behavior stays pretty good. New problem solving, had I been taking out wisdom teeth and got into an artery or something, the impairment I had, that person very likely would have died, then maybe wouldn't have if I wasn't impaired. New problem solving. Anyway, things were going downhill terribly. One of my college classmates came to visit and asked me, Curtis, what is wrong with you? And for the first time, I confided in somebody what I was doing. I was miserable and had no way of knowing how to get out of it. He went home to Sacramento, and he later told me he made about 50 phone calls and finally found the well-being committee for the Reno Dental Society. And the person he talked to gave him hope, knew what he was talking about, and said he could help me. This friend called me back and said, Curtis, you know, next Wednesday night, you need to drive down to Reno and go to Dr. Jackson's office in the basement. You're going to meet with some guys who can help you. And, you know, I don't know what possessed me, but I did it. I was desperate. I did it. Now, they did an intervention, and I, of course, told them where to go and how far up there to go. But I didn't forget. They talked about that that there was a solution. I didn't hear that part. All I heard was I needed to go to treatment. And there was a place in Atlanta, Georgia, that specialized in healthcare professionals. Well, I didn't do that. I did not do that. A month later, my wife found me in bed with a gun. And, you know, I don't know if I was planning on killing myself, but, you know, what are the odds? She and a friend got me down to a treatment center in Reno, Nevada. It's kind of a little, we call them spin dry, you know, a little 2-week treatment center. After 3 days, I walked out the door, came home, you know, promised my wife I was cured. She didn't know the difference. Well, of course, I was going downhill. we were pregnant with our second daughter. We'd had our first daughter 3 years before this point. And now this is, for the time frame, this is 6 years after I graduated. You know, life was going to hell. But my wife was pregnant. She was, of course, working. We had this huge debt. But on top of that, while I was still successfully doing fillings, I was in no shape to manage staff. You know, anything that had emotions around it, I was out to lunch. So she had preeclampsia. The doctor told her she needed to stay home, and she said, I can't, we owe too much. Well, it was also she had an insane husband and didn't even understand that. Neither of us did. Well, we came home one night and she laid down to watch TV. She was very sick. And she said, did the electricity go out? And I said, no, why? She says, everything's black. She'd gone blind, temporarily blind. I took her blood pressure. It was 280 over 190. And I was terrified, absolutely terrified. You know, the person I loved most, despite my behavior, it was who I loved most at the deepest core, was in crisis, and I had zero tools to deal with it. I ran out to the garage, looked for drugs, couldn't find any, drank 10 beers as fast as I could. Another one of those things that for years I used to tell this story as my only coping mechanism were substances, so I went to utilize that tool, and while that's true, there's the deeper level. I couldn't not use. I was powerless, despite whatever my value system was. I woke up on the garage floor the next morning, made some calls, and my wife was in the hospital. I raced up there. As I walked in the room, the doctor was walking out and said, Curtis, we're waiting for the weather to change, to fly her over the mountain to Reading, to do an emergency C-section to try and save her life. This was 11 weeks early. You very likely won't have a baby, but we need to try and save her life, and there's a chance maybe we can save the baby. The doctor said she's in lots of pain. The nurse is bringing her some pain medicine. And when the nurse brought 2 Percocet in a little paper cup, set them on the table, I reached over and grabbed them before she could and put them in my mouth. And that was my bottom. My bottom as being defined by I could no longer be in denial that I had violated my own value system. And the pain of that was greater than anything I'd ever experienced. I did not know what to do, obviously. I flew her over the mountain, did a C-section. The baby lived. That's our second daughter, Taylor. She's graduating from Loma Linda dental school this May 29. You're going to come practice with us. Well, I didn't know what to do, and I was hopeless, despondent. I was, going to work, going to the hospital in Reading to visit my wife. On the 2-lane roads, every truck that was coming, I was looking at, is that truck big enough that if I swerve into it, I will actually die? But I never had the courage to do it. My wife and baby got home, and in June, so she was born in April, so a couple months, I hadn't stopped using. I couldn't. I didn't know what to do, but I was despondent. The Wellbeing Committee in Reno hadn't forgotten about me. And they were asking questions. They knew I was crashing. They knew, they were experienced. They knew what level I was using things. I was a danger to people. So they called the well-being committee in the Bay Area. That guy called the dental board, and it was Arliss Tenbrock was the diversion program manager at that point. Some of you, I'm sure, know her. She heard about me, the stories that they had gleaned, and in June, she called me on the phone. The phone call I had been fearing the most happened. She said who she was. I was absolutely terrified. I hung up on her. Went home and told my wife, I need to go to that treatment center in Atlanta, Georgia. And she said, what are you talking about? And I said, they've caught me and I can't stop using. And she, of course, was terrified. We had this baby, the baby was 2 pounds, 7 ounces at that point. We had this practice, 16 employees, huge debt. She didn't want me to go. I mean, whatever. This is her story. I can't tell her story, but I told her I had to. She begrudgingly drove me to the airport in Reno. I don't think she stopped. I think she slowed down enough for me to get out, is about it, and never looked back. I bought a ticket to Atlanta. I found the name of the treatment center, called them, said I was coming. I got halfway to Atlanta, had to change planes in Denver, but I was so drunk at the Denver airport, I got arrested for public drunkenness, put in the drunk tank for the night, made it to the treatment center a day late. I didn't believe anything was going to happen. I had no hope, but I knew I had to do something. I didn't know what. I couldn't kill myself, and I had to do something. Part of the intake, they did a very thorough, as Jenny was talking about, they did a very thorough assessment. It took over a week of neuropsych exams, new problem solving, psychosocial, family, internal medicine. It was very thorough workup. They had me fill out lots of paperwork. They said they were a 12-step based treatment program, and there was 150 other healthcare professionals in treatment there. And when I'd heard the guys in Reno tell me it was a place that specialized in healthcare professionals, I thought that was because I was special. The truth was, it was a place where I went to treatment where I couldn't be special. And they knew about some of the other things Jenny was talking about, the unique triggers in a healthcare provider's environment. Well, one of the sets of paperwork were 3 pages of questions about spirituality. And I know the moderator said, please don't use profanity, but I have to tell you what I wrote diagonally across. Instead of answering the dozens of questions on those 3 pages, I wrote diagonally across those pages, fuck this. And I tell that story to elicit that I had horrific anger. I had no spirituality. I'm not talking about religion, just, no spiritual connection with anything bigger than me. Well, I was in treatment 5.5 months. One of the first things we had to do was write out a first step inventory, which was minimum of 40 pages of examples of powerlessness and unmanageability. And took me 6 weeks to write that. I was very impaired, and I had to heal enough to be able to do that. And then once I got it done, I had to read it out loud, stand up and read it out loud in front of the entire group. Now, during those 6 weeks, I've been going to groups, and amazingly, they were not talking about drugs or alcohol. They were talking about feelings. How do you feel? And I was frozen. I had no idea of how I felt. Well, I read that first step inventory of examples of powerlessness and unmanageability. And standing up and reading it, you know, I told you folks on this meeting today 2 or 3 examples of insanity. I had hundreds of situations when I had almost killed people with motorcycles. I crashed an airplane. I was carrying a gun around, who knows why, you know, paranoid. Times I had almost killed people, I had almost been killed, so sheer insanity. And when I was reading that out loud, something hit me that the fact I was alive could not be coincidence. There was too many times. Something bigger than me had kept me safe and alive. And after reading that out loud, I sat down, I got feedback from the people. I didn't even hear any of it. I think I was in a moment. I went into my next group and, you know, they started out with, how do you feel? And for the first time, I realized I had been frozen and talking about how I felt because I was absolutely terrified of admitting how scared I was, how angry I was. And if that power greater than me had kept me alive, whatever that power was, I wasn't even willing to call it a God. It was just something bigger than me. If it kept me alive, I very likely needed to believe it would keep me safe if I admitted I was scared. And that begun my emotional recovery. Okay, so I need to move along quickly here. 5.5 months in treatment, I didn't want to leave. When I came home, you know, I had called Arliss Tenbruck, told her where I was. She said she knew. She said, when you come home, you need to enter the diversion program. I did. You heard the requirements that that Jenny talked about. I had all of those, you know, for 5 years, going to meetings, going to therapy groups, office monitor. I started realizing I was the happiest I'd ever been by being honest, open, and willing. I didn't, you know, I had no desire to stop doing those things. I also, the 12th step of the AA 12 steps is having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry the message to those still suffering. Realized I needed to try to give back if I wanted to keep it. I called my local dental society, the Northern California Dental Society, asked if they had a well-being committee. They said they didn't. I said, okay, I'm the new one. Didn't really know what to do, but they put my phone number in. That first year, I got 50 phone calls, and I sent 17 of our dentists to treatment. That was 26 years ago. I have continued trying to give back to help me keep it. And nothing about me, this next statement is not about Curtis Vixie. It's about the power, the process. Between the California Dental Association's Wellbeing Committee that I was chair of for 18 years and the board's diversion program, I have helped hundreds and hundreds of dentists get to treatment. And that has been my #1 vehicle to help me in my spiritual program. I want to wrap it up. I'm sorry I took so long here, but I want to wrap it up by very heartfelt thank you to the dental board. The entity that I was the most terrified of is the entity that gave me life back. It gave me, allowed me to continue my career, allowed me, my wife and I still employ 16 people. We've created jobs for 16 other families. I still have my same wife. I have 2 daughters who love me and talk to me. I'm a member of this community that I would not have been had I not gotten into recovery. And it is this body, this board's continued commitment to the diversion program that was the vehicle that allowed me to have what I have today. And I want to give an incredibly heartfelt thank you to this body. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Vixie. Thank you, Ms.
Thank you, Ms. Matthews, for your presentation of your program. And Dr. Vixie, thank you for your very, very deeply personal story, which is very telling. I've heard it before, and it moves me every time I do. We have a little time to entertain a few board questions and comments. Are there any? Please raise your hand if you'd like to say something and or ask a question. Ms. Medina.
I would like to, thank Dr. Vixie for his very powerful story, and thank you for sharing. Your story shows that there's a great benefit of us having a strong diversion program, and I totally support it.
Thank you. Are there any other board comments or questions? Dr. Montel.
Hi, thank you. I too would like to echo the appreciation to Dr. Vixie for the very powerful story. I think it's really good for us to hear it and to understand, all the details about what our decisions, the ramifications of the decisions we make here. So thank you for that. I did have a question for Ms. Matthews. Just was interested in when she was discussing the return to work. I wondered if there was, if I could kind of understand in general how long people would take to return to work. Actually, I understand the program itself, they're in for years, but as far as the return to work goes, is there like a general time frame that you see people going back to work?
This is Virginia Matthews. I would say that every case is handled individually. Typically, we evaluate them at the first meeting where they're seen by the committee. So that would be within the first 3 months after they're enrolled in the program. And I would ask Dr. Vixie to jump in on that one too, because he sits on the committee and can talk about the committee's reasoning in making those decisions. But we look at a number of things, and I kind of alluded to that on the slide, but we really look at every individual case and how they're doing and whether they're ready to return to work safely.
Yes, I can jump in. The majority of our participants, we try to get to, when they need treatment, to a treatment center that has at least a half of their patient population of healthcare professionals, because those treatment centers understand the safety sensitive nature of being a dentist or a physician. And we go a lot off of the discharge summary of that treatment team. They've seen the person for 3 to 6 months, and they know their issues. At times, they will even put the person through a mock dental board, not to take the role of the dental board, but to see their skills, to see if they've had physical impairment or not. And they give us a very good guide when they say this person is ready to go back to work after 4 months of treatment, or this person needs a year of not practicing to get their recovery sound before they start practicing. So we have help, besides those of us having combined many hundreds of years of recovery on the committee. We have the help of the treatment team that gave them the intimate 10 hours a day treatment for months. So we're using the expertise of professionals in the field to help us with that question.
Okay, very good, thank you. And also, did you have, I heard that there was some data about this, your completion rate with the successful completion rate with the program. Did you have any data as far as people who finished the program and successfully completed it but have then relapsed? Have you come across that?
Track relapse rate. I don't have it specifically for the dental board. And off the top of my head right now, I don't have it for the program overall. We do look at it though. It's not tremendously high. I'm sorry, I don't want to quote it without knowing exactly what it is though, but I can send that information back to the board.
Thank you.
a study done by Skipper and McClellan
Right.
of 1,600 physicians from, I don't know, 15 or 20 state diversion programs. And they have a number, same as Ginny. I'm hesitant. Please don't hold me to, but I think it's less than 7% relapse after the 5 years, and more than half of that 7% usually call and ask for help again. But it's dangerous for me to say that on this forum. That study can be looked up, but that's a rough idea.
McClellan and Skipper is where you can find that. Those are the authors. But yes, I want to say it was 5% on that study. But
Okay.
yeah, you're right. It's a low relapse. It's a low recidivism rate.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Montel. Let's call on Dr. Morrow for the last of the board comments.
Thank you. Curtis, we've known each other for a long time. And I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you sharing your life story with the members of the board. And I want to let you know how much I appreciate you and what you have been able to accomplish for fellow dentists who are struggling with the challenges, similar challenges that you have had in your lifetime. Thank you very much for your contribution to the profession.
For saying that.
Thank you, Dr. Morrow. Before we go to public comment, I would like to offer a personal apology to all of you at this meeting for that laundry lapse way back then and my failing to mute the phone. But what I was trying to do is demonstrate one of the disadvantages of meeting from home. Let's move on to public comment. DCA moderator, if you'll facilitate comment, we'll take a few comments for there, and then we're going to take a break.
This is the moderator. We've opened the Q&A panel. If you'd like to comment on this presentation, please click on that Q&A icon on your screen, type comment into the text box, and submit that to the host. Or for call-in users, you can dial *3 to raise your hand. And seeing no requests, I will close the panel.
Thank you very much, moderator. We are going to take a little bit of a break, and let's come back at 11:05. Give you a couple of extra minutes just for my mistake today. Okay? Do we have the board members back?
It appears that everybody is still connected.
Okay, very good. I don't know, Miss Mackenzie, are you with us, or she's still out? She had a conflict for a little bit and said she'd join us back. So on the off chance that she's not here, that's understandable. Let us go back to work, please. At this point, we're going to pick up on agenda item 25B, the Diversion Program Report and Statistics. I will ask Bernal Baba, the Chief of Regulatory Compliance and Discipline, to present this item. Mr. Baba.
Good morning. My name is Bernie Vaba, Chief of Regulatory Compliance and Discipline. I will be presenting agenda item 25B, Diversion Program Report and Statistics. This memo provides the statistics through December 2021. These statistics reflect the participant activity within the diversion program. At the end of December, 7 participants remained within the program. Of the 7 participants, 3 were self-referrals and 4 probation referrals. The next diversion meeting is scheduled for April 6, 2022. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Are there any board questions? Raise your hand, please. Seeing none, DCA moderator, would you please facilitate the lines for public comment?
This is the moderator. We've opened that Q&A panel. If you'd like to comment on this item, please use that Q&A icon to access the text box. Submit the word comment to the host, or for call-in users, dial *3 to raise your hand. Seeing no requests, I will close the panel.
Thank you very much. We now move on to agenda item 25C, the Controlled Substance Utilization Review and Evaluation, or CURES report. I'm going to ask Mr. Carlos Alvarez to present the data on this one. Good morning, Mr. Alvarez.
Good morning. Carlos Alvarez will be presenting CURES report, agenda 25C. And the report is as of December 31st of 2021. As of December 2021, we have 182 new licensees that have registered for CURES. So currently right now there are 16,734 new registered licensees with CURES. The CURES statistics for searches for October of 2021, there were 16,837 searches. For November 2021, there were 16,424 searches. And December of 2021, there was 15,443 searches. The times that the system was accessed, this is a web application and information exchange web services. So meaning that there's these corporations, there's more than one office, they share the same sign-on credentials, and that information is shared. So as of October 2021, it was accessed 3,665 times. November of 2021, 3,350. And December of 2021, 3,634. The help desk. So this is phone calls and emails that DOJ received reference CURES. And for the help desk statistics, October, there was 152 help phone calls and emails. November of 2021, there was 189. And December of 2021, there was 276. And then as you see below, we provided the total prescriptions filled by schedule from October through December of 2021. And now these numbers and statistics is for all healthcare physicians in the state of California. So these are all licensees who are authorized to issue prescriptions. And I will conclude my report.
Thank you, Mr. Alvarez. Are there any board member comments or questions for Mr. Alvarez? Raise your hand, please. Dr. Morrow.
Carlos, I have a question regarding some of the data that you have in your report. I am seeing that we have currently in California 31,155 active licensed dentists. However, as of December of 21, we only had 16,700 and some change that were registered with CURES. What is the difference? We're looking at, close to 50% of our dentists are not registered with CURES.
Yeah, so what we try to do, we try to get information from the DEA's office to see who is registered. We try to get statistics. Unfortunately, they don't share that information. So when we do conduct investigations, that's one of the things that we ask is, are they signed up for CURES? Some licensees are not signed up for CURES because they do not write prescriptions at all. And so they're not registered with CURES. But I do see that the number is lower. But like I said, we try to reach out to the DEA's office, but they just won't release any information for us.
Well, Carlos, of these 31,000 plus licensed dentists that we have in California, do we have any data on how many of those have a license in California but are actively practicing in another state?
We do have that information, I believe is in our reports, but we haven't really taken a look at it to look into these licensees that are not signed up for CURES. But like I said, part of our investigation is once we receive a complaint, we're able to ask if they're registered with CURES.
If we have a dentist licensed in California that is not practicing in California, but actively practicing in another state, do we have any responsibility regarding their compliance with this statute and this legal requirement?
Yeah, so they are supposed to be registered with Cures. So if they're, again, they're prescribing any prescriptions, they're out of state, they still have to comply with Cures. So
do we have any way of monitoring that compliance?
That would come from the Board of Pharmacy or the pharmacist that will report it to the board, and it'll be handled that way. Once they're reported, then we could actually look into it via complaint.
Well, do we only have responsibility for those dentists that write prescriptions that are filled in California, or do we have responsibility for a dentist who has a license in multiple states, California being one of them, but issues prescriptions in a different state?
Then if they're licensed with the state of California, they're out of state, and they're filling prescriptions in state, then they still have to comply with the laws.
No, they're filling prescriptions in California or outside of California.
So in California. So that's,
but
so
we have no
if they're out of state, yeah, if they're out of state and they're filling in California, then if they have a license in the state of California, then yes, they fall within our jurisdiction. But if they're filling prescriptions out of state, then that all depends on the state laws for that jurisdiction.
But that same individual could be in non-compliance with their California practice, with their California license. If they're prescribing, if they're not prescribing or inappropriately prescribing and they have a California license, do we as the California board have any responsibility there?
Yes, we do. If we receive a complaint and they're out of compliance, then yes, we have jurisdiction.
Okay. Have we received in the past any such complaints?
No, we haven't. Like I said, we've received very few complaints that come from the Board of Pharmacy or pharmacists.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Morrow. Are there any other board member comments or questions? Seeing none, Dr. Morrow, I assume your hand is going to go down here. Is that correct? Thank you. Are there any public comments? DCA moderator, please facilitate the lines for public comment.
This is the moderator. We've opened that Q&A panel. If you'd like to make a comment, type the word comment into the text box after accessing that Q&A panel. For call-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand. And seeing no requests, I will close the panel.
Thank you, moderator. We now move to agenda item 25D, update on the new electronic prescribing laws, which just went into effect about 6 weeks ago. So, Mr. Alvarez, would you like to comment on what's going on there?
Sure. Thank you very much. So, as we all know, beginning January 1st of 2022, most prescriptions issued by a licensed healthcare practitioner to a California pharmacy must be submitted electronically. And so in order to ensure that dentists licensed by the Dental Board of California were apprised of the new requirements that would be taking effect on January 1st, what we did, we posted alerts on our website. So we posted the AB 2789 bulletin, which describes the new prescribing laws that would take effect on January 1st. On December 13th of 2021, we updated the bulletin that came in from AB 2789. It was a new bulletin, it was updated, and we posted that on our website. And to addition, we sent out e-blasts to all of our dental board licensees that started in September 7th of 2021. Then thereafter, every 2 weeks, and the e-blast went out. The last e-blast went out on December 29th of 2021. So the regulation includes control and non-control prescriptions, schedules 2 through 5, and also the pharmacies because we get a lot of questions as who's supposed to report the prescription once it's released. And usually pharmacists are the licensees most commonly thought as being the dispensers. So the majority of the time, the pharmacists release the prescription, they report that they released the prescription via cures. We did have very few inquiries that we received here at the dental board, and some of those inquiries were, again, was this just for controlled substances? Some of the inquiries were that they only prescribe 1 or 2 prescriptions a month, and do they still need to send out, being with compliance with the laws for e-scripts? And it was pretty much yes. We only had 1 referral come in from a pharmacy reporting the licensee wasn't in compliance, but we did look into it, but it was due to a technological failure that they had. And that's part of the exemptions of the new laws is if there's a technological or an electrical failure, they could issue a paper prescription, but it has to be documented in their patient records. So we only had one referral from a pharmacy. So as of now, we haven't received any complaints that licensees are out of compliance.
Thank you. Any additional board member concerns? I see none, so let us see if there are any public comments. DCA moderator, please facilitate the lines for public comment on this item.
This is the moderator. We've again opened that Q&A panel. Click on that Q&A icon and type the word comment into the text box if you'd like to request to make a comment. Or for our call-in users, you can dial *3 to raise your hand. Seeing no requests, I will close the panel.
Thank you. We will move on to agenda item 26A, which relates to the an update regarding the board implementation of SB 501, which is Glazer, Chapter 929, Statutes of 2018. I'm going to ask Ms. Jessica Olney, the Anesthesia Unit Manager, to present this item. Good afternoon or good morning, Ms. Olney.
Thank you, Dr. Felsenfeld, and good morning, members of the board. My name is Jessica Olney, Anesthesia Unit Manager, and I'll be presenting agenda item 26A, which begins on page 194 of your meeting materials. To give some background, Senate Bill 501, which became effective on January 1st, 2019, makes significant changes to the current general anesthesia, medical general anesthesia, conscious sedation, and oral conscious sedation for minors permits, and introduces new moderate sedation permit, pediatric minimal sedation permit, and a pediatric endorsement and monitoring requirements when administering anesthesia or sedation to minor patients. Excuse me. In order to implement these changes, board staff with subject matter experts and legal counsel have developed proposed regulatory language, which was approved by the board on November 19, 2021. Board staff prepared the initial rulemaking, which was submitted to the Office of Administrative Law for publication, which initiated a 45-day public comment period on the proposed regulations on December 31st, 2021. The 45-day comment period closes February 15th of 2022. Board staff have also received requests to hold a public hearing on the proposed language, and a public hearing has been scheduled for February 16th, 2022 at 1:30 p.m. This will be held via WebEx, and it will be facilitated by board staff. This hearing is an opportunity for the public to submit verbal comments on the proposed language. In addition, a board meeting has been scheduled for March 14, 2022 to address the public comments received and approve any modifications to the proposed language. In an effort to reduce the impact to existing permit holders who may expire prior to the approval of the rulemaking, the board worked with the Department of Consumer Affairs and Office of Information Services to reconfigure the BREEZE system and open renewals for all permit holders to expire in 2022 to allow them to renew and continue to practice under the terms of their existing permits by December 31st of 2021. Board staff notified permit holders via email, mail, and telephone to encourage them to renew by December 31st of 2021. And I'd like to thank all the staff from our Sacramento and Orange, California offices who helped to make all of those phone calls. Board staff identified 1,414 permit holders who were eligible to renew, and as of January 3rd, 2022, 77.5% of the permit holders had renewed successfully. You'll find a chart of the renewals by permit and permit type on page 195 of your meeting materials. Also discussed at the November board meeting is the implementation of the new permits and modifications of existing permits in the BREEZE system. Modifications to the BREEZE system are typically started once the regulations are approved. However, in an effort to minimize the impact to permit holders and implement the changes as quickly as possible, the Office of Information Services in December of 2021 solicited for bids to secure an external vendor who will configure the BREEZE system. This process is ongoing, but the vendor will work with board staff to configure a simplified version of the transactions needed in BREEZE to implement the required changes, which will be done simultaneously with the regulatory approval process. Also discussed at the November board meeting are concerns with the gap in anesthesia and sedation administered to dental patients, the effective date of the new permits, the unknown effective date of implementing the regulations, and updating the BREEZE system. A legislative proposal was approved by the board for submission as emergency legislation, which would establish the maximum fee limitation for pediatric endorsement applications and renewals, renumber the section subdivisions to account for the new pediatric endorsement fee provisions, correct the existing conscious sedation permit renewal fee provision and instead provide for moderate sedation permit renewal fees, and establish the expiration date for pediatric endorsements using the same expiration provisions as licenses. Based on discussions with lobbyists, we believe that Senator Patricia C. Bates will amend Senate Bill 652 to carry this legislative proposal. This concludes my report as no action is requested, and I'm available for questions. Thank you.
Dr. Felsenfeld, this is Sarah. I believe you may be muted.
Still having a little shock from the morning. Okay, sorry about that. Let me start with a question real quick, Ms. Only, if you don't mind. Of the 23% that did not take advantage of the extended renewal period, do we have any idea why they did not?
Hi, Dr. Felsenfeld. When staff were making phone calls, they were getting a variety of responses. Some permit holders decided not to renew, and we're going to go ahead and retire or let their permits lapse.
Okay.
In other cases, we may not have been able to reach the permit holder. Okay. We contacted everyone by mail at their address of record, by email at their email address of record, and by telephone at their telephone number of record. And also, in addition to live phone calls made by staff, there were also automated phone calls with a pre-recorded message that went out to all. But, you know, there may have been some permit holders who may not have received the messaging in time.
Okay, thank you. With over 1,000 people, it was a yeoman's effort, and we appreciate all that you've done. Are there any other board member comments or questions about this report? Being none, let's see if there are any public comments. DCA moderator, please facilitate the lines for public comment.
This is the moderator. We've opened that Q&A panel. If you'd like to comment, please use that Q&A access and send the word comment to the host, or for our call-in users, dial *3 to raise your hand. Our first comment comes from Dr. Bruce Witcher. Dr. Witcher, I've sent a request to unmute your microphone. As a reminder, you'll have 2 minutes.
First of all, there was a lot of difficulty with the department finding a vendor for the original Breeze system. And when the Breeze system completed their contract, they kind of left it to the boards and bureaus to outsource any further IT that would be needed. And I hope we don't run into the same problem with OAS finding a contractor to continue on with the Breeze operations and make these changes. I must say I'm a little pessimistic given our experience in the past with Breeze. The other question or comment I would like to make is I believe 652 will extend the implementation date out till 2023. I hope that's enough time and that another extension won't be needed. I'm sort of cautiously optimistic that this will all come together, but it's a big concern. I'm commenting both on my own behalf and also on behalf of CDA. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next comment comes from Monica Miller. Monica, I've sent the request to unmute your microphone.
Hello, Mr. Chair and members. Monica Miller on behalf of the California Association of Nurse Anesthetists. And we first and foremost want to thank your staff for being so accessible, realizing that they have to be careful about what they can talk to us about with regard to the regulations, but still willing to hear us out on a pretty regular basis. We will be providing comments at the February 15th special committee hearing that you'll be holding both written and verbally. But just want to let you know that we do have some concerns about these regulations. And again, we'll be submitting that both written and be at that particular committee hearing. And thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Our next comment, actually, looks like that's our last request. I will close the panel.
Okay, thank you very much. We now move on to agenda item 26B, a discussion and possible action on the supplemental report to the California State Legislature regarding findings relevant to inform dental anesthesia and sedation standards as required by SB 501 Glazer, Chapter 929, the Statutes of 2018, and the B&P Code Section 1601.4, Subdivision A2. I'm going to ask Ms. Awley to take the lead on this item, please.
And good morning to the members of the board. My name is Jessica Only, Anesthesia Unit Manager, and I'll be presenting agenda item 26B, which can be found on page 197 of your meeting materials. Senate Bill 501 amended Business and Professions Code section 1601.4 subdivision A to require the board to review available data on adverse events related to general anesthesia and deep sedation, moderate sedation, and minimal sedation in dentistry, and relevant professional guidelines, recommendations, or best practices for the provision of dental anesthesia and sedation care, and required the board by January 1, 2022 to report to the California State Legislature any findings relevant to inform dental anesthesia and sedation standards. On November 19, 2021, the board discussed, revised, and approved the draft report and directed staff to submit the final report to the California State Legislature by January 1 of 2022. Board staff finalized and submitted the report on December 22nd, 2021. The board received a letter from the American Association of Oral Maxillofacial Surgeons, referred to as AAOMS, on November 17, 2021, who expressed concerns that the draft report had omitted provider specificity data, intended patient sedation level data, and AAOMS anesthesia guidelines. It was determined that board staff would review the concerns and potentially submit a supplemental report to the legislature. Board staff, with Board President Dr. Alan Felsenfeld, reviewed the concerns and have prepared the following responses. For information related to provider specificity data in accordance with Business and Professions Code 1680Z2, the board created a courtesy form for reporting dental patient death or hospitalization, which was made available on the board's website. To address the AAOMS's request, board staff have begun a review of the death and hospitalization reports submitted to the board to compile data on provider types for potential inclusion in the supplemental report. While reviewing the reports, board staff have found that some submitted reports contain incomplete information on the provider categories, which are specified in Business and Professions Code 1680Z3. It appears that individuals who completed the submitted forms or non-forms reports may have not understood the provider categories. To clarify the provider types for an individual submitting the death and hospitalization report, board staff have updated the form to clearly identify the provider categories and posted it to the board's website on January 19th of 2022. The link to view the updated form can be found on page 198 of your meeting materials. Board staff also began a review of the intended level of sedation for each patient provided in the report submitted to the board to compile data on the planned depth of sedation. Board staff review of the reports has been delayed as we've experienced significant staffing issues due to the emergence of the COVID-19 Omicron variant. We anticipate completing the report review and potentially submitting a supplemental report to the board for its review and discussion at the May 2022 meeting. AAOMS also raised concerns that the report did not include the AAOMS parameters of care and the AAOMS office anesthesia evaluation in the list of relevant professional guidelines, recommendations, and best practices. We're unable to provide a link as these are not publicly available. When developing the report, the board looked at staffing, education, certification, and equipment used in the administration of anesthesia and sedation in dental offices. The report referenced 8 different professional organizational guidelines relevant to dental anesthesia and sedation standards, which included practice guidelines for moderate procedural sedation and analgesia developed by a task force of 6 organizations, including AAOMS. Although the AAOMS parameters of care and the AAOMS office anesthesia evaluation requested to be included in the report also provide standards regarding administration of anesthesia and sedation in dental offices. Inclusion of these guidelines in the report would not alter the information or produce a significant difference to the information already included. Board staff do not recommend including the additional AAOMS guidelines in a supplemental report. Staff is requesting the board to take the following actions. 1, discuss whether to include the AAOMS parameters of care and AAOMS office anesthesia evaluation guidelines in the supplemental report. And 2, if approved for inclusion in the supplemental report, direct staff to include the AAOMS parameters of care and the AAOMS office anesthesia evaluation guidelines in the draft report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Olney. Are there any board member comments or questions on this topic? Dr. Chan.
This is Steve Chan. Actually, I have a couple of questions that may reflect my gap in background. On the provider specificity data, I understand the reasoning behind the collecting this data, but there is some assumptions that may be not clear. For example, on page 198, the second paragraph, I understand where the AOMS raised a question about the training of general dentist in maybe sedation and in anesthesia, where if a general dentist went through a general practice residency, there's variability across the country on what that residency can offer. If it's emphasis on surgery, yes, they could have more training in that, but if it's just general practice, not just general practice, but general practice, there could be less training in anesthesia. The second question is, again, this may reflect on my gap in knowledge, but I don't know of the curriculum for pediatric dentist postgraduate training in their curriculum for anesthesia. There could be variability there. The third element is on the identification. It identifies a whole series of identifiers, and then they say other. And the question that I have there is, does perio and endo do sufficient anesthesia, general anesthesia, or sedation in their types of practices where we may need that type of identifier? So those are more open questions on gathering the data. We're looking for gaps in where we can improve the process on identifying where those gaps are that would lead to deaths or to hospitalizations. Thank you. Did I get lost?
You didn't get lost. Are there any other, is there someone who wants to take on some of these questions that Dr. Chan raised, I guess is the question.
This is Jessica Only.
Go ahead. Thank you, Ms. Only. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, you know, these sound like questions that we will not be able to answer at this time, but can take back. And to clarify, a general dentist cannot provide deep sedation or general anesthesia. Only a dentist who has completed a residency in either oral and maxillofacial surgery or anesthesia can qualify for that permit. As far as the question about other on the provider categories, it doesn't specify what other categories can be. But your question about, I believe it was perio and endo, is something that we may have to look at further, but I wouldn't be able to provide an answer on what their curriculum or how much training they receive at this time.
Thank you.
If I may jump in for 1 second, Ms. Only, to be able to, these categories are all permittees. They have an anesthesia, moderate sedation permit, or whatever. And do they not have to have training that we've defined in statute before they can get these permits?
Yes, each permit has its own either residency or course requirement in order to qualify for the permit.
So perhaps that will help Dr. Chan with his concerns about, you know, who are they and what have they learned? They have to have absolute standards to be able to get the permits is what I'm suggesting. Okay, let's move on. Are there any other board comments or questions about this item? How about the second phase of this, the decision, do we want to, or the actual question is, do we wish to include the AMIS parameters of care? Any comments on that? Seeing none, I assume the answer will be no by that definition. Let's see if we have any public comment on this. I'm going to ask the moderator to open the mics for public comment.
This is the moderator. We've again opened that Q&A panel. If you'd like to comment on this item, please click on that Q&A icon on your screen. Type comment into the text field and submit that to your host. For our call-in users, you may dial *3 to raise your hand. Our first comment comes from Dr. Bruce Witcher. Dr. Witcher, I've sent the request to unmute your microphone.
We lose Dr. Witcher.
Dr. Witcher, if you could unmute your microphone. There we go.
My other comment didn't get through. I would just like to thank you for this presentation and for addressing some of the comments that came in from other members of the public as well as myself. I think this additional detail will be very helpful to those who are into this sort of thing. So thank you for doing this.
Thank you. And not seeing any other requests for comment. Would you like me to close the panel?
Yes, you may. Thank you very much. At this point, we're going to move on to agenda item number 27, which will be the presentation and possible discussion on permitting certified registered nurse anesthetists to administer general anesthesia in dental health care settings. And this is the California Association of Nurse Anesthetists, or CANA, who will be presenting. I'm going to ask Ms. Wallace to maybe comment and introduce the concerns the concepts and introduce the representatives. Ms. Wallace.
Thank you, President Felsenfeld. This is Sarah Wallace, Interim Executive Officer. I wanted to introduce this agenda item. I have met with the California Association of Nurse Anesthetists, and they have asked to provide a presentation to the board on the permitting of certified registered nurse anesthetists to administer general anesthesia in dental healthcare settings. And there's two representatives here today that will be providing a presentation, Melanie Rowe and Monica Miller, who are representing CANA.
I'm sorry, can I interrupt?
Yes.
Mr. President?
Yeah, who is this?
This is Dr. Molina. Were we supposed to vote on item 26B?
Dr. Molina, from a parliamentary and meeting standpoint, if there was no motion to do either of the two things, or we actually did have the discussion, but I asked if there was any desire to include this, and nobody raised it and said they wanted to make a motion to include it. Therefore, it kind of dies a parliamentary death. There was no voting on that.
Thank you for the clarification.
It becomes an informational report at this point, since the board did not want to take action on it. Thank you for asking. Good. Please go back. I apologize. Please go back to the presentation by CANA.
Thank you. And so today we have Melanie Rowe and Monica Miller from CANA available to provide a presentation to the board. Before we begin, I wanted to provide the board members with some context of the licensing and permitting requirements that are currently structured for certified registered nurse anesthetists. They are currently licensed by the Board of Registered Nursing. The dental board itself does not issue a license, certification, or permit to nurse anesthetists. Business and Professions Code Section 2827 specifies that the utilization of a nurse anesthetist to provide anesthesia services in an acute care facility are required to be approved by the Acute Care Facility Administration and the appropriate committee at the discretion of the physician, dentist, or podiatrist. Specifically as it relates to the dental board, if a general anesthetic agent is administered, presumably by a CRNA, in a dental office, the dentist is required to hold a general anesthesia permit authorized by the board through Business and Professions Code. And so currently, the CRNAs do have to operate in a dental, if they're operating in a dental office, they have to be under a dentist that has a general anesthesia permit who does the ordering of the drugs. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Melanie Rowe and Monica Miller. They're going to be providing us with a presentation. And I also want to preface this by saying we will also be discussing Senate Bill 889 later on in the agenda, which is also tied to a legislative proposal that CANA has introduced, and I expect the board will be discussing that impact during the legislative discussion. So with that, I think, moderator, if you can admit Melanie and Monica, we're ready to begin.
They have been promoted.
Board members, I am Melanie Rowe. I am a CRNA, Certified Registered Nurse Anesthetist. I serve as a practice director for the California Association of Nurse Anesthetists. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today about how CRNAs have been administering anesthesia everywhere that is needed in California, and being able to apply for our own anesthesia permits from the dental board will open up our opportunities for California dentists if they choose to use our services. And Ms. Jones, can I take you up on going to the next slide for me, please? Thank you. CRNAs are advanced practice registered nurses who collaborate with surgeons, obstetricians, anesthesiologists, dentists, and other healthcare providers to deliver safe, high-quality anesthesia care to patients in every healthcare setting it is needed, from level 1 trauma centers, children's hospitals, VA hospitals, to ambulatory surgery centers and office-based settings. We've been administering anesthesia for more than 150 years, and our roots in California started in 1905 when nurse anesthetist Alta Bates opened her clinic for women and infants out of her home in Berkeley, California. California, like many other states, allows CRNAs to administer anesthesia independent of physician supervision. There have been attorney general opinions, legislative updates to business and profession codes, and state Supreme Court decisions that have affirmed this. The legislature in 1983 passed the Nurse Anesthetist Act, which made nurse anesthetists independently responsible for our professional conduct and potentially liable for our professional acts. CRNAs have been administering anesthesia in dental offices, but like it was mentioned, the dentist has been required to hold the anesthesia permit from the dental board. The blue box highlights the 2827 of the California Nurse Anesthetist Act. We have been approached by dentists and CRNAs alike who want to work together but have been held back by this administrative barrier. Dentists who want to add anesthesia services to their practice may not want to apply for the permit themselves. On the left, the blue highlighted portion of the California Nurse Practice Act, subsection 2725B2, authorizes nurses to administer anesthesia. And in 1984, the Attorney General concluded that the language in the section provides express authority for an RN to administer an anesthetic. It just needs to be ordered. Over the years, some have questioned if this order means supervision, and it does not. There are other places in the Nurse Practice Act that show that the legislature was very clear about the terms supervise and the terms ordered by, and they are not intended to be synonymous. As licensed independent providers in California, CRNAs are responsible and accountable for decisions made and actions taken during an anesthetic. We evaluate the patient before the anesthetic, select and administer the anesthetic agent, monitor the patient during the procedure. We have the education, training, and skills so that we are prepared to manage adverse events and emergencies, ensure safe recovery, and discharge patients to home. If a dentist wishes to have an anesthesia provider in their office, we are a safe and effective option. May I have the next slide, please? Thank you. One of the infographics provided to you describes CRNA education and training. We have RN license and a bachelor's degree in a health or science specialty, or a bachelor's of science in nursing. We all have critical care experience taking care of the sickest patients in a hospital. Most have adult ICU experience, but many CRNAs have neonate and pediatric experience in NICUs and PICUs. We often start our moderate sedation experience in these critical care settings with bedside procedures and ancillary locations like CT scans and MRIs. Critical care nurses applying to a CRNA program have an average of 2.9 years of critical care experience, and competitive applicants have more. When we graduate from our master's or doctoral degree program, which are now 3 years in length, we are qualified to administer every type of anesthesia. After 2024, all CRNAs will graduate with a doctoral degree. CRNAs are constant learners. Passing the national certifying exam is a credential with the C in our title and has been required of every CRNA since 1956, and we recertify every 4 years. In California, there's over 2,700 licensed CRNAs. Nationwide, there's over 59,000 CRNAs. We have 5 schools in California, and there's more than 100 schools nationwide. Next slide, please. Thank you. A workforce study is in progress by current doctoral students. They shared with me that one of their questions was, out of the 501 CRNAs who responded, none work in a dental office now, but that 56% of them responded that if they held a dental permit, it would increase their opportunities in seeking work at dental offices. I'll take the next slide, please. You'll recognize this risk management explanation in the middle of this infographic that was provided to you titled CRNAs Ensuring Safe Anesthesia Care. CRNAs are educated, trained, and experienced in providing safe anesthesia care. We follow standards of practice that all anesthesia providers agree are safest. Our practice is under our own RN license and CRNA certificate from the California Board of Registered Nursing. We all carry our own malpractice insurance. While surgeons and dentists commonly order nurse anesthetists to provide anesthetics, control of the anesthetic is by the anesthesia provider. Courts have examined the degree of control the physician exercise over the anesthesia administrator, regardless of whether the administrator is a nurse anesthetist or another anesthesia professional. It is clear from case law that the operating practitioner or proceduralist, to be liable for the acts of the anesthesia provider, they must control the anesthesia administrator's actions. So here are 20 articles and case studies found on the American Association of Nurse Anesthetists website. I know it's small, but my goal is to show you the volume of literature that easily supports that there is no increase in liability to a dentist when utilizing CRNA anesthesia services. And more confirmation of this point is that in 2014, TDIC changed their rating classification to include CRNAs. Previous to this, the rating classification for anesthesia was only for a physician anesthesiologist, DDS anesthesiologist, or an oral surgeon. The director of underwriting wrote, and I quote, "The change was made to this classification to give you additional options for the care of your patients. There's no increase to your premium due to this change," end quote. There is no increase in insurance premiums to utilize a CRNA for services in a dental practice. I'll take the next slide, please. So, of course, drugs and medical supplies are needed for anesthesia administration. The process should be the same as any other anesthesia location, the same as surgeons' offices and clinics, ASCs or hospitals, where drugs are ordered by the facility. California law allows pharmacies to provide drugs to dentists without confirming whether a dentist holds a GA permit. None of the code sections impose any qualification for the dentist to order or a pharmacy to provide the dentist anesthetic drugs. None of the sections distinguish between controlled and non-controlled medications. Under the Federal Controlled Substance Act, dentists wishing to obtain anesthetic agents for their own office supplies may do so by submitting the DEA Form 222, showing a current DEA registration to a pharmacy. This form does not ask for any state permit information, and no other state or federal laws were found that requires this information as a condition of obtaining these drugs. There are DEA requirements for Schedule II medications, for example, having a date of inventory, counting at the start and at the end of the day, naming the controlled substance, the dosage units, and it's counted with another licensed professional. This is the same process that we already do at any other facility, including surgical office settings. When they don't have an electronic medication reconciliation, this kind of paper chart and documentation is very routine and what we already do. The specifics about these codes and laws were submitted in a letter from CANA to Ms. Fisher in March of 2021 for your reference. Currently, not every permit holder provides their own medications in a dental office, so the same process and arrangement between the anesthesia and dentist would be the same. Ordering medications and supplies can be a business arrangement between the CRNA and the dentist. I'll take the next slide, please. So in a dental office, CRNAs are anesthesia professionals who maintain current certification in adult and pediatric life support and airway management. CRNAs can help maintain and document safety equipment, emergency cards, medications, and CRNAs are competent to treat the following emergencies. It's the same as the current list for other anesthesia permit holders. That's part of our education and our experience. I'll take the last slide, please. Thank you. If a California dentist chooses an anesthesia professional for their practice, all eligible professional providers should be permit eligible from the Dental Board of California. After these slides were submitted, SB 889 was introduced. I kindly ask for you to review it and support it. We are happy to clarify any questions the board or staff has. CANA appreciates all the work and communication your staff has provided over the years, including the opportunity to speak with you today. We look forward to continuing that good work and communication with the dental board staff to provide important dental services to all Californians. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rowe. Was your partner going to say something today, or she's just there for support with you? Yeah.
Monica is representing us, and she commented earlier. And if you have any other questions, either she or I can answer them.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much. Then, okay. Are there any board member comments, questions, or suggestions? Please raise hands. I see none. Moderator, please facilitate board comments on this topic.
This is the moderator. We've opened the Q&A panel. Any members of our public would like to comment on this item, please use that Q&A icon to access the text box and submit the word comment to the host. For our call-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand. And seeing no requests, I will close the panel.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you to our CANA representatives for the presentation, and we are certainly looking at those things, as you know. And no action is required, so there were no motions made. So we'll move on to agenda item 28, the report of the January 12th, 2022 meeting of the Elective Facial Cosmetic Surgery Permit Credentialing Committee, and discussion and possible action to accept committee recommendations for issuance of a permit. I'll ask Ms. Paige Regali, the Acting Licensing and Examination Unit Manager, to present this item. Ms. Regali, good morning.
Good morning, Dr. Felsenfeld, and good morning to the members of the board. My name is Paige Regali. I'm the Acting Dental Licensing Unit Manager, and today I'll be presenting agenda item 28, the report on the January 12th, 2022 meeting of the Elective Facial Cosmetic Surgery Permit Credentialing Committee. First, today I will provide a brief background on the Elective Facial Cosmetic Surgery Permit and Committee. The EFCS permit was initiated into statute in 2006 and became effective January 1st, 2007. Business and Professions Code section 1638.1 establishes this permit, and it is for oral and maxillofacial surgeons and allows them the ability to perform elective facial cosmetic surgery after meeting certain requirements that are established within the statute. The committee that reviews these applications is comprised of 5 members who are appointed by the board. 1 member is a physician and surgeon with a specialty in plastic and reconstructive surgery. 1 member is a physician and surgeon with a specialty in otolaryngology, and 3 are oral and maxillofacial surgeons licensed by the board and certified by the American Board of Oral and Maxillofacial Surgeons, one of whom is a licensed physician and surgeon in California. All physicians and surgeons are required to maintain active status on the staff at a general acute care hospital. The committee meets as needed on a quarterly basis to review and discuss applications. Upon completion of review of the application, the committee shall make a recommendation to the board on whether to issue or not to issue a permit to the applicant. The permit may be unlimited, entitling the permit holder to perform any cosmetic procedures in Category 1 and/or Category 2, or it may be restricted and limit the procedures which the applicant is able to perform if the committee is not satisfied the applicant has the training or competence to perform certain procedures, or if the applicant has not requested to be permitted to perform all procedures within the section. Category 1 procedures consist of cosmetic contouring of the osteocartilaginous facial structure, which includes but is not limited to rhinoplasty and otoplasty. Category 2 procedures consist of cosmetic soft tissue contouring or rejuvenation, which includes but is not limited to facelifts, lip augmentation, and blepharoplasty. The committee met on January 12, 2022 via teleconference to review and discuss 2 applications. One application was tabled pending receipt of additional documentation. All 5 committee members were present. As another overview, the general requirements of this permit are to submit proof of successful completion of an oral and maxillofacial surgery residency program accredited by the Commission on Dental Accreditation and of the American Dental Association, certification or to be a candidate for certification by the American Board of Oral and Maxillofacial Surgery, submitting a letter from the program director of the residency program attesting to the education, training, and competence necessary of the applicant to perform the procedures applied for, submitting documentation of at least 10 operative reports from residency training or proctored procedures that are representative of those procedures the applicant intends to perform, submitting documentation of surgical procedures at a licensed general acute care hospital and or a licensed outpatient surgical facility in California, and submitting proof of active status as staff at a general acute care hospital. Dr. Ian Lair submitted an application requesting unlimited privileges for Category 1 and Category 2 and has completed all of the requirements for this permit. With that said, the application has been reviewed and discussed by the committee, and the committee recommends that the board issue a permit to Dr. Lair for a limited Category 2, which is cosmetic soft tissue contouring or rejuvenation procedures. Staff is requesting the board consider and take action on the following: a motion to accept the EFCS Credentialing Committee report and motion to accept the EFCS Credentialing Committee recommendation and issue Dr. Ian Lair an EFCS permit for unlimited Category 2 privileges. Thank you. That concludes my overview.
Thanks, Mr. Gully. Is there any board comment or questions about this? Seeing none, we are going to need a motion to accept the report if that's what we wish to do, and to accept the credentialing for Dr. Lara if we wish to do that. I'm going to suggest, and I hope I'm not breaking any rules, I'm going to suggest that we combine the two and do it as one, with the understanding that if we accept the report, that we will have credentialed Dr. Lara to do as they recommended. Is there any discussion about that real quick? Dr. Loreen.
I make a motion to accept the Credentialing Committee report and to issue Ian Leher an EFCS permit for unlimited Category 2 privileges.
Thank you. Is there a second? Dr. Morrow?
I second the motion.
Thank you. Is there any additional board discussion? Seeing none, we're going to ask if there are any public comments. DCA moderator, please facilitate the lines for public comment.
This is the moderator. We've opened that Q&A panel. If you'd like to comment on the motion before you, please use that Q&A panel to submit your request. And for our call-in users, dial *3 to raise your hand. Our first comment comes from Dr. Bruce Witcher. Dr. Witcher, I'd sent the request to unmute your microphone.
To indulge the board in accepting a comment on the previous agenda item. The moderator was a little too quick, or somehow I was technologically not adept enough on my end to get it in. I can submit this in writing in the interest of time if you would prefer that.
Probably that would be appropriate, since we really want to keep the comments to the item on the table at that point, Dr. Witcher, if that's okay.
Understood.
Okay, thank you. Any other public comments? This is the next question.
I am not seeing any other requests at this time. Would you like me to close the panel?
Please do. We now have a motion on the floor. Board Secretary, please call the roll and record the votes for this agenda item.
Do you want me to read the motion?
Please do.
So we're voting on the motion to accept the EFCS Credentialing Committee report and to issue Ian Leher, DDS, and EFCS permit for unlimited Category 2 privileges. I will call the roll. Chan, aye. Fessenfeld?
Felsenfeld, aye.
Fessenfeld, aye. Larin?
Larin, aye.
Larin, aye. Mackenzie? Mackenzie, aye. Medina? Medina, aye. Mendoza? Mendoza? Molina, aye. Montel? Montel, aye. Morrow?
Morrow, aye.
Morrow, aye. Olagi? Olagi, aye. Pacheco?
Pacheco, aye.
Pacheco, aye. You, aye. Motion passes.
Thank you very much. We now move to item 29A, the tentative legislative calendar. Going to ask David Brueggemann, the legislative and regulatory specialist, to facilitate the agenda items regarding legislation. Mr. Brueggemann.
Board members, I am David Brueggemann, and I'll be presenting on the calendar. The legislative calendar for 2022 for both the Assembly and the Senate can be found starting on page 216 of the meeting materials. I'm simply going to highlight three particularly important dates as we move forward in terms of how legislation will proceed this year. Next Friday, February 18th, is the last day for bills to be introduced this year. Following that, on May 27th, that is the last day for each house to pass bills that was introduced in that house. So anything that the Assembly introduced would have to be passed by the Assembly by May 27th. Anything that the Senate introduced would have to be passed by the Senate by May 27th. And then finally, if you go ahead to August, on August 31st, that's going to be the last day that each house has to pass bills for this year. So that's going to affect our staff time as we continue to track legislation and inform the board of bills that may impact the board and licensees as appropriate. And since this is an informational item, there's no action requested by board staff at this time. And that's going to conclude my report on the calendar.
Thank you, Mr. Brueggemann. Is there any board comments or questions about the calendar as presented? Seeing none, are there any public comments? DCA Moderator, please open the lines for public comment.
This is the moderator. We've opened the Q&A panel. If anyone would like to comment on this item, please click on that Q&A icon on the screen. Type comment into the text field and submit that to the host. For our calling users, you may raise your hand by dialing *3. Seeing no requests for comment, I will close the panel.
Thank you. Next up is agenda item 29B through S, an update and discussion and possible action on legislation. I'm going to ask Mr. Brueggemann to come back and present this agenda item as well.
Thank you, President Felsenfeld. The dental board staff have been tracking several pieces of legislation, and I'm going to summarize the status of all those particular bills, but we will only be presenting on two particular pieces of legislation for possible action by the board at this meeting. So all of this can be found in a map that begins on page 220 in the meeting materials. So there were a total of 18 bills that are covered in this memo. But as I mentioned before, the board staff is only going to ask for possible discussion and action on 2 of them. And those would be bills that have already been discussed this morning. The first one is SB 652, and the other one is SB 889. SB 652 has to deal with sedation, and SB 889 has to deal with nurse anesthetists. We'll get into more details on those specific bills in a moment, but I'm going to discuss briefly the other bills that we'll not be asking for action on at this time. There are 7 bills that we've identified as being potential interest to the board. We're going to continue to watch these bills and report on their progression through the legislature. And should there be a time in which we would think that the board may need to act, we'll bring that up at the appropriate time. Those bills are as follows. AB 225, which concerns veterans and military spouses and licenses. AB 562, which is the Frontline COVID-19 Provider Mental Health Resiliency Act. AB 646, which is a Department of Consumer Affairs wide bill concerning boards and expunged convictions. AB 657, which has to deal with personal services contracts in the state civil service system. AB 1102, telephone medical advice services. SB 49, concerning income taxes and the California Fair Fees tax credit. And SB 731, concerning criminal records. So while we are not going to present on these bills at this time, we would be, at this point, we could open this group of bills for comment from the public. So, moderator, if you would be able to open the queue for public comment at this time specific to these 7 bills that I just listed.
Is that right?
Sorry, this is Sarah. David, I don't think we need to. At this point, they're 2-year bills, so I think we'll just continue to watch them. The board has taken previous watch positions on them, and if any movement happens, we'll bring them back at the May meeting.
Certainly. Apologies for overstepping there. I'll move on to the other 9 bills in the memo. These bills have died in the legislature. They did not pass certain thresholds set by the rules of the Assembly or by the Senate. These bills are as follows. AB 2, concerning regulations. AB 29, having to deal with state bodies and meetings. AB 54, about the COVID-19 emergency order violations. AB 885, which deals with the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act and teleconferencing. AB 1026, concerning business licenses and veterans. AB 1236, concerning healing arts and licensees and data collection. AB 1386, having to deal with license fees and military partners and spouses. AB 1498, having to deal with members of boards within the Department of Consumer Affairs and per diem payments. And then finally, SB 772, concerning citations and minor violations in professions and locations. And again, those 9 bills, they are dead in the legislature. We had been tracking them, but given that they will not proceed this year, we're going to, that is all that we need to do, and no action is necessary at this point. So I would then like to just go ahead and focus on the bills I mentioned. We may have discussion and possible action. And the first one of them is SB 652. We've had some discussion about it earlier. We have indicated that we anticipate this bill to be the legislative vehicle for some additional addressing the implementation gap between the effective date of SB 501 and the implementation of new permits. As of this time, however, those changes have not been made to the bill. As it's currently written, it would extend the current requirements for dental patients under 13 years of age, specifically that an operating dentist and at least 2 additional personnel be present throughout a procedure involving deep sedation or general anesthesia, and that the dentist and 1 additional personnel maintain current certification in advanced cardiac life support to all patients regardless of age. And again, that's how the bill is currently written. We anticipate amendments, but they have not been introduced at this time. And Sarah, I don't know if you wanted to add anything additionally concerning SB 652.
Thank you, David. So as David mentioned, the bill in its current form does address personnel requirements for the administration of adult sedation and anesthesia. It is anticipated that this is the vehicle for the board's legislative proposal. I have been working with the Calamos representative and CDA, and we've been in contact with Senator Bates' office. It's my understanding that the bill moved on the 31st. It's anticipated amendments will be taken in the Assembly, and then they'll go back to the Senate for concurrence. At this point, board staff is recommending the board take a position of support when those amendments become published, and so that the board staff will be able to send a letter of support immediately to the author's office and to the appropriate committee. And I expect that to happen in between our meeting now and possibly the March meeting, but could be the May meeting. So in the interest of time, we ask for the board to take a support position when the bill is actually amended.
And I'll go ahead and talk a little bit about SB 889. This bill was just recently introduced January.
Mr. Brueggemann, let's deal. No, that's quite all right. Let's deal with this one now, because you're going to have a series of different things in 889, and we do have to take action on this bill. So let's do that, and then we can let you continue on with your presentation. I think that will facilitate the meeting a little better. So, thank you. Is there any board member discussion on 652 right now? Then can we have a motion to, I'm sorry, Dr. Chan, go ahead. Didn't see your hand.
I'm going to move to support SB 652 pending the amendments publication.
Thank you. And Ms. McKenzie, welcome back. Thank you. Seconding. Is there any further board comment on any of this? If not, before we take the vote, is there any public comment on this bill? DCA moderator, please facilitate the line so public can comment.
This is the moderator. We've opened that Q&A panel. If you'd like to comment on this piece of legislation and the motion before you, please use that Q&A icon to access the text box. Submit the word comment to the host. And for our call-in users, you can dial *3 to raise your hand. Our first comment comes from Dr. Bruce Witcher. Dr. Witcher, I've sent the request to unmute your microphone.
Yeah, Dr. Bruce Witcher commenting on behalf of CDA. Of course, we would support a legislative extension, and I believe CDA is heavily involved in the development of the language, so thank you.
Thank you. Not seeing any other requests for comment, I will close the panel.
Thank you. Board Secretary, please call the roll and record the votes for this item.
Voting on the motion to support SB 652, pending amending of the language. Chan.
Chan, aye.
Chan, aye. Fessenfeld.
Felsenfeld, aye.
Fessenfeld, aye. Larin.
Larin, aye.
Larin, aye. McKenzie. McKenzie, aye. Medina.
Medina, aye.
Medina, aye. Mendoza. Mendoza, aye. Molina, aye. Montel.
Montel, aye.
Montel, aye. Morrow. Morrow. Olagi. Okay. Morrow, aye. Olagi?
Olagi, aye.
Olagi, aye. Pacheco?
Pacheco, aye.
Pacheco, aye. You?
You, aye.
You, aye. Motion passes.
Position on that bill. Mr. Brueggemann, go ahead, continue, please, on 889.
Thank you. And for purposes of the moderators, great, thanks. Slide S. So SB 889 was introduced on January 31st. It's since been referred to the Senate Committee on Business, Professions, and Economic Development, but there's no, as of yesterday, there was no hearing date scheduled. The bill would amend the provisions of the Business and Profession Code concerning the use of deep sedation and general anesthesia involving nurse anesthetists. It would modify the requirement in the BPC Code section 2827 that the dentist would have to have a sedation permit for a nurse anesthetist to administer general anesthetic. The bill would allow for a nurse anesthetist to administer deep sedation or general anesthetic if it is done in compliance with Article 2.75 of the Practice Act. Use of deep sedation and general anesthesia, apologies. Language in the bill would allow a nurse anesthetist to administer deep sedation or a general anesthetic even if the dentist lacks the permit to do so. So this proposed bill would again, grant a nurse anesthetist the ability to administer deep sedation or general anesthetic under a dentist authorization, assuming that both are in compliance with relevant laws and regulations. At the moment, our review of the legislation indicates the bill lacks some clarity about the responsibilities of any party administering the deep sedation or general anesthesia under the direction of a dentist, whether or not the dentist has a permit. As it's currently written, it's also unclear if allowing the nurse anesthetist to perform these procedures at the direction of a dentist without the sedation permit would meet the dental standard of care. But the bill was recently introduced. We're going to need additional time to do a more complete analysis of the impact of this legislation, which is why we're recommending that the board take a watch position. And that's the extent of my report on SB 889.
Thank you, sir. Do we have any board comments on this particular item? Dr. Morrow. Dr. Morrow, I don't think I'm muted. Can you hear me? Dr. Morrow, you were on, and I think you muted yourself. Now you're unmuted. Go ahead, Dr. Morrow.
Okay, Morrow, take a watch position on this bill.
That was a motion. Is that correct, sir?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a second then? Dr. Chan?
Second it.
Thank you. Is there any other board discussion on this motion? Chan, I assume you're going to put your hand down. Is that correct?
Well, actually, I am in support of the question, or if it's unclear whether or not the nurse anesthetist would perform these procedures at the direction of a dentist that does not have a GA permit. I am concerned about that also.
Okay. Any other comments by members of the board? Seeing none, are there any public comments? DCA moderator, please facilitate the lines for public comments.
This is the moderator. We've again opened that Q&A panel. If you'd like to comment on this legislative item, please use that Q&A panel to submit the word comment to the host. For our call-in users, you can dial *3 to raise your hand. First comment comes from Dr. Bruce Witcher. Dr. Witcher, I've sent the request to unmute.
Thank you. Usually when a bill hasn't even had its first committee meeting, it would be good to take a watch position. So I would certainly be in support of that. I'm speaking on behalf of CDA and also myself. I think you are aware there are some outstanding issues, and this has kind of been alluded to in some of the board comments. Although the dental scope of practice does include anesthesia, this is somewhat limited by the requirement for dentists to have a general anesthesia or moderate sedation or minimal sedation permit. Even though a dentist has a DEA permit, they're not actually authorized by the Dental Practice Act to order, dispense, administer anesthetic drugs and controlled substance utilized unless they hold the required permit. And this would make it necessary for a CRNA to somehow obtain the drugs or anesthetic administered to a dental patient when they're not ordered by the permit, by a permittee. And the one way around this might be if they were ordered by a facility that holds an institutional DEA permit. So I guess my point is this has a way to go, and there's some unresolved issues that will need to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next comment comes from Monica Miller. Monica, I've sent the request to unmute your microphone.
Monica Miller, representing the California Association of Nurse Anesthetists. First of all, thanks for hearing this bill so quickly as it was just introduced. Second of all, we'll continue to work with your staff. The clear intent of this legislation, as we've worked on for the last 5 years, is to allow for nurse anesthetists to hold the dental anesthesia permit, therefore allowing the dentist to not have to obtain that permit should the dentist decide that they want to provide a service of anesthesia, particularly in areas that have a particular lack of providers and a high Medi-Cal population. But again, we'll continue to work with your staff and our author is committed to that as well, and happy to answer any questions. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you. And not seeing any other requests for comment, I will close the panel.
Thank you. Board Secretary, please call the roll and record the votes for this agenda item.
The motion that we are voting on is to take a watch position for SB 889. Chan.
Chan, aye.
Chan, aye. Fessenfeld.
Aye. Felsenfeld, aye.
Fessenfeld, aye. Larin.
Larin, aye.
Larin, aye. McKenzie. McKenzie, aye. Medina.
Medina, aye.
Medina, aye. Mendoza. Mendoza, aye. Molina, aye. Mantel.
Montel, yes.
Mantel, aye. Morrow. Morrow, aye. Olagi.
Olagi, aye.
Olagi, aye. Pacheco.
Pacheco, aye.
Pacheco, aye. You?
You, aye.
You, aye. Motion passes.
We now move on to agenda item 30, discussion and possible action regarding legislative proposal to amend the Business and Professions Code section 1750.2, 1750.4, and 1752.1 to specify time limits for acceptance of course certifications for orthodontic assistant permit, dental sedation assistant permit applications, and clarify board-approved course requirements for RDA registered dental assistant applicants. Ms. Wallace, I'm going to ask you to present this, please.
Thank you, President Felsenfeld. This legislative proposal comes from a recommendation from the Dental Assistant Council. Board staff had previously identified some inconsistency issues with statutory application requirements between registered dental assistants, orthodontic assistants, and dental sedation assistants. I wanted to provide a brief background in that the current requirements for registered dental assistants specify that the course requirements have to be completed within 5 years prior to the date of application. That includes the course in the Dental Practice Act, the course in infection control, and the basic life support course. And then the orthodontic assistant permit course and the the orthodontic assistant permit and the dental sedation assistant permit application requirements do not require that those courses be completed within a specified period of time. And so board staff recommended the council consider whether or not to amend the sections relating to the application requirements for orthodontic assistants and dental sedation assistants be amended to specify the 5-year time frame to be consistent with the application requirements for registered dental assistants. Alternatively, the requirements for registered dental assistants did not specify that the Dental Practice Act course was a 2-hour course and that the infection control course is an 8-hour course, where amendments that specify those requirements have been made in other statutory sections. And so the council recommended that the board consider a legislative proposal to address these consistency concerns. And they're recommending the board take action to amend Business and Professions Code Section 1750.2, 1750.4, and 1752.1 to clarify the RDA, OA, and DSA course completion requirements for license and permit applications. Board staff is asking the board to discuss and consider whether or not the described legislative proposal is necessary, and if approved, we ask that the board consider it to be included in the board's next sunset review report as a new issue to be included in that statutory bill. Board staff has included the proposed language on pages 250 through 253, which you'll see is highlighted in blue font, blue italic font, which outlines the new requirements. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any board member questions about the proposed legislation? I see none. Do we have a motion to amend the sections of BPC that we mentioned, clarify the course completions as written in the proposed legislation within our packet? Dr. Yu?
Approve.
Okay. And is there a second? Ms. Pacheco?
I second the motion.
We have a second to the motion. Is there any other board discussion on this? Seeing none, I assume Dr. Yu and Ms. Pacheco, your hands are still up. Do you want to discuss that further, Dr. Yu, or you want to take your hand out, sir? Thank you. Is there any public comment? DCA moderator, please facilitate the lines for public comment.
This is the moderator. We've opened that Q&A panel. If you'd like to comment on this motion, please click on that Q&A icon on your screen, type comment into the text field, and submit that to the hosts. For our call-in users, you can dial *3 to raise your hand. Our first comment comes from Claudia Pohl. Claudia, I've sent the request to unmute your microphone.
Business Association. Just want to mention that we are in support of these changes and appreciate staff's effort in bringing them forward. Thank you.
Thank you. One last check. I don't see any other requests for comment. I will close the panel.
Thank you. Board Secretary, would you please call the roll and record the votes for this item?
We are voting to include in the next sunset review report a recommendation to amend BPC sections 1750.2, 1750.4, and 1752.1 to clarify the RDA, OA, and DSA course completion requirements for license and permit applications. Burden. Oh.
Chan.
I have, yes, Chan.
Chan, aye.
These last year's speak.
Felsenfeld.
Felsenfeld, aye.
Felsenfeld, aye. Larin.
Larin, aye.
Larin, aye. Mackenzie. Mackenzie, aye. Medina.
Medina, aye.
Medina, aye. Mendoza. Mendoza, aye. Molina, aye. Montel.
Montel, aye.
Montel, aye. Morrow. Morrow, aye. Olagi.
Olagi, aye.
Olagi, aye. Pacheco. Pacheco, aye. You.
You, aye.
You, aye. Motion passes.
Thank you. Before we go to item 31, I would like to take a point of personal pride, I think is a good word, to suggest and give a shout out to Mr. Brueggemann. Am I saying your name? Brueggemann, I think it is. Mr. Brueggemann has been with the board 10 days, just 10 days. And on the second day that he was here, he was tasked with putting together the legislative program that he presented. Strong work, sir. Keep it up. Thank you. All right. Item 31, discussion of prospective legislative proposals. Ms. Wallace, do you want to speak to that?
Thank you, President Felsenfeld. This is a standing agenda item, and stakeholders are encouraged to submit proposals in writing to the board before or during a board meeting for possible consideration at a future meeting. And as of right now, we do not have any stakeholder proposals to consider.
Thank you. Is there any board member comments on this? Please raise your hands. Seeing none, are there any public comments? DCA moderator, please facilitate the lines for public comment.
I've opened the Q&A panel. If you'd like to comment on this item, please click on that Q&A icon on your screen, sending the word comment to the host. And for our call-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand. Seeing no requests, I will close the panel.
Thank you. And thank you, moderator and board staff and board members and guests for your assistance with this meeting today. We got a lot of work done. And this concludes the February 10th and 11th, 2022 Quarterly Dental Board meeting. This meeting is adjourned. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend.
Have a good weekend. Bye.
Have a good
We'll
week.
see you next time.